Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Maps and Graps. It's been a while, but I am happy to be back. This is a very special episode because it's not actually a review of any wrestling that's happening now. It's a review of this amazing series that recently dropped on Netflix, Queen of Villains, also known as the Dump Matsumoto show, um, story that was recently released on Netflix. As always, I'm your host, Lyric Swinton, and I have a very special guest. And this is when I say special, I mean special because she's retired. She's retired, but she decided to pop out for the one time. We have Ciara on the pod. Hello, how are you?
Hello. Hi. Remember, guys, I'm retired.
And people are still gonna ask you, hey, can you come
Yeah,
talk about
I get it. I get it all the time. I'm like, no.
but you want to know, I do think that that's a real testament, I would say, like to your work and also to this space, because I think that a lot of people are really grasping at people who actually like wrestling to talk about
Yes,
wrestling. And I know that sounds crazy, but we don't
but
have a
it's
lot
the
of
truth.
it, especially when it comes to women's wrestling. There are not a lot of people who actually like women's wrestling who
No,
are
everybody just decided to leave when Shimmer went down. I don't know what's going on. Hey, everybody that was in the Shimmer wrestling group, if hey, wake up. I don't know where y'all went, but like, come back, please. It was a great time. I don't like this. It's lonely out here. Come
not fun,
on.
not fun at all. So we're talking about Queen of Villains. This was 5 episodes, about I would say 40 minutes to an hour, 20 minutes, I think, per episode.
Hmm.
And I do want to start by saying, as much as they were able to compress in here, there was
Yes.
a lot that they left out. There's a ton of stuff that was left out.
Yes.
And this could have easily been a 10 episode series. What I did really liked about this show is that for the first time in a long time, I feel like this is the rare wrestling mainstream project that wasn't about who killed WCW. Um, and
Okay.
I am so tired. I'm just so tired of us talking about the same things. But I also think it's really cool. This kind of felt, even though I was kind of sad that it was just only 5 episodes, it did kind
Hmm.
of feel like it was a trial run to see how this type of content would do.
Hmm.
And I, I mean, I haven't seen anybody say anything negative about it. I've only seen positive. So I hope that this means that more of these type of stories will be told. I feel like it was super authentic. Um, so what were your thoughts when you first heard, as somebody who's been studying Joshi for such a long time,
Hmm.
when you first heard that they were making this into like obviously a Netflix series, like what were your first initial thoughts?
Well, I had seen someone had tweeted something I would dump, and I'm the type of person I hit translate. I'll translate broken English. And I was sitting there, they're like, it was saying a documentary. I said, no, you guys are not, because you guys don't ever try to do anything. And I want to say it was about maybe 2, 3 years ago. Um, Actually, it might have been longer than that because I was still writing. And Pad did like an interview, and she was talking about her childhood, and I was reading, and I'm just like, this is crazy. It's wild. But when I seen that Netflix was doing it, and I said, now, how is Netflix going to do this? Because I was concerned that they were just going to do something cheesy, you
Yeah,
know, make a make believe story, but not actually base it on actual facts or falsify it to the point where it's like, this is not even Bull, this is not Bull Nakano, this is not Don't Matsumoto, this is not, these are random people. And I mean, we've seen them do that. So to actually see them actually go forward with the series, and then when they started putting out pictures from the film, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is too authentic, this is to the point. Um, and then watching it, I felt like I went through a time warp.
hmm,
They perfectly placed everything to make you feel like you were back in the 1980s. Literally, right at, I would say 1978 going into the early 80s, where with the colors, the placement, the attire, the whole aesthetic was there. That there was a moment I was sitting there and I'm like, is this 2024 or is it 1979? Like, what year is it? And I was more impressed by all of the things that they pre-made to look like the Crush Girl stuff. To pretty much put in your mind like this was a thing. And another thing that really impressed me with this whole film is like here in the States, wrestling is made fun of, it's mocked. We know this. To see that over there in Japan at a time where a young girl say, "Okay, I graduated school, I'm gonna go become a wrestler." It seemed like such a normalized thing.
Correct.
Like, oh, she's gonna go wrestle. Okay. Whereas here in the States, we're still kind of like, you're gonna do that? Like, you're really gonna do there? It was just like, oh, she's gonna go wrestle. That was so interesting to see because I read about that being a thing, but to see that, it was just like, wow, like it was such a big deal that they were just willing to be okay with their kids going to wrestle.
Absolutely. I think that they did a brilliant job of capturing the pageantry and the reverence for women's wrestling.
Hmm.
They made it feel, and the thing is, like, they still weren't able to fully capture how big some of these acts were.
That's
But
true.
and that's the crazy part. Like when we think about like how big some of these acts actually were, they still weren't even able to fully capture. But it's just like the way that they brought that All Japan Women's logo to life of like bringing all these. It's like it looked perfect. Like that court, the Corkin Hall setup
Yes.
of just it was just so beautiful. And I think of just those opening sequences of just. I remember when did I watch it for the first time? I watched it for the first time. I think I started at like 11 p.m. at night or something.
Hmm.
And that opening sequence, Beauty Pair doing their song,
Yes.
just gorgeous to the point where I kept rewatching that part over and over and over again. Like it felt regal. It just felt
Hmm.
big. And when you put it in like, and when you put it on the timeline and you think of just this is happening in Japan. Meanwhile, while US is really coming like off of the women's movement of just it's very forward. Like it's very forward thinking in comparison to a lot of
Hmm.
things that we were used to. Um, it was just absolutely down to the casting of just you look at the pictures of some of these people.
Hmm.
I think some people said like the actors that they chose to play Lioness Oscar specifically was almost a dead ringer, for her.
Hmm.
The details were amazing. And listen, I've seen a lot of wrestling projects, and I
Yes.
don't think that it's a coincidence that the details look so great when I don't know when women are involved. Of just when they
Yes.
said that Chigusa Nagayo was like hands down like already like choreographing stuff and like hands on like instructing different things, you can tell like you
Yes.
can absolutely tell like I mean that's just one of the things that instantly blows you away. Just the
Hmm.
the music. It's just
Everything felt like you were right there.
absolutely, and they did it.
And we don't see that often.
No, I think they made it feel really big. I think even starting from the beginning when they do the beauty pair split, and so you have the
Yes.
Maki versus Jackie match, and they're selling out venues. They're putting 20,000 butts in seats. Like they have these large banners hanging outside
Yes.
women's wrestling, all about
Yes.
women of just it was just it to the point it was so overwhelming. I was just like, even though you read about it, of course, like I think so
Yes.
many of us have read about it and we've watched matches here and there, but like the to be taken back to where you can almost feel it and touch it,
Hmm.
just absolutely insane.
It's with Jackie and Maki, it's just like with both of them. Because I sat here and I was like, when I was watching it, like you said, when they open up with that scene, I'm sitting here like, I don't know the words to the song, but like, okay, we in this, we all in the club together.
Beauty,
I felt like
beauty.
I was like, makes you feel like you're in there because the way the crowd is responding, they're moving to their movements. Everybody has on their, their beauty pair garb, their posters and everything. Like everything was about them because not only were they a wrestling duo, they were a singing duo, they were an idol group. Like that's when idol culture pretty much started in Japan
Correct. Yes.
around right before them. So to see. like we see idol culture now. Like
Right.
it's like a normalized thing. We're just like, oh, they're gonna be idol. Um, but it's like seeing that, and you're just like, I get it now. I get why they were so big because they were the idols. You've seen them. They were on television shows, everything. And then when I looked it up, and I'm like, they didn't stay together long. They were only together for 3 years. 3 years. And they were that big. And it's just like, here on the American side, even when I looked it up, because I was like, I know what the 1980s was in American culture with women's wrestling.
Mhm.
Moolah was still in control. Mildred Burke had already been blackballed. Um, Moolah was training all the girls. All the girls was giving her a percentage of their pay. They were all getting in the ring doing their one, two, threes. And it was, in comparison, it's just like, it was like night and day. It was completely different. And it's wild that if the shoe was on the other foot, I wonder if back then it wasn't so male controlled, if they actually allowed that to happen with women. I mean, I think they thought they were going to have a Wendy Richter, but we seen what happened with that. But
Absolutely. That's
but it's just that's like the scary thing because it's like out of the 1980s, she was pretty much the only big one.
mhm.
I mean, you had your Sherry Martells and everything, but at that point, they had relegated a lot of those wrestling girls as valets or managers. So you didn't really have one that you could say out of the 1980s who can be the American version of them. You didn't have that.
I think also too of just knowing that, knowing what we know now. I think if the American wrestling scene wasn't so, I think, monolithic at the time, it seems like that type of idol culture would have been something that WWF probably would have jumped on. Like,
Oh yeah.
and they would have succeeded at. Obviously, they got stuff like in those early WrestleManias, but to the extent that Japan was able to really do it, I don't like. You can tell like there was extra politics going in. But you want to know what? I'm really glad that you brought that up because it brought up a different point of just another thing that we see in that early episode is Monster Ripper, who and if you like read history, like and she's like this, she's Bertha Faye, here to the American audience, but in Japan she was a goddess, and I think that's so many different. It's the difference in presentation too of just how they were
Hmm.
presenting, how women were presented. It's night and day, and it shows really how that culture started, and I really do enjoy how like they painted those pictures because
Hmm.
it makes a lot of sense. And even like for the idol culture, when we talk about beauty pair of that was really how women got their foot in the door. The
Yeah.
sense of if we want to do this, like, if we want to be taken seriously as wrestlers, be these big stars, we have to sell albums, we have to sing, we have to tour, we have to do
They're a
this.
package.
And it goes back to what we see from women and women's wrestling today. And so, like in beauty pair, like they weren't able to stay together long, but we see Jackie, that what she meant for that to be the segue for her to have this more serious career. Like she wants
Hmm.
to be taken serious as a wrestler. And then obviously we see it continue to show up with the
Yes.
gals.
With Monster Ripper, that's the reason why I sighed is because I have my favorites, but she's like one of my other favorites. Because, like you said, here in the American side, we recognize her as sweet old Bertha Faye.
Hmm.
And then if you was around for WCW's dying days, you know her as Beef, the Nitro girl that was just, the heavyset girl trying to be a Nitro girl and being ostracized because of her weight.
Hmm.
Um, which is sad because regardless of her weight, when she was in Japan, she was one of their top heels.
Absolutely.
She had won titles. She was, even before Japan, when she was working up in Canada, she was pretty much built that same way. And when she came here to WWE, and it's like, I tell people all the time, I'm like, I don't think you guys understand. It's a completely different version of her in Japan.
Hmm.
And you see her in Japan, she's wrestling in cage matches, hair all wild, beating the hell out of everyone. And then you turn on, WWE Monday night, and then she's out there skipping with Harvey Whippleman, and it's just like, no, like this is a problem. And I remember some years back when I was working with Medusa at that time when she was trying to work on her podcast, and we had a conversation about her.
Hmm.
And I was asking her like how was her experience working with her, and she said, she was hurt. She hated that she was relegated to that. And I'm pretty sure, I can't remember how she explained it, but there was a time they had a match where they just went balls all out, wrestled like they did in Japan, and they got criticized for it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And she was saying that they did that because she was like, I wanted them to see her as how I met her, not as this overweight, can do only a few things. And they were against that. So watching this, I loved how they recreated that. But the
Absolutely.
thing I had a problem with, I don't know this Caucasian woman from a hole in the wall. I don't know you, sis. But why did we have to get a Caucasian woman and put this horrible wig on? That just like threw me off
The
because I'm
wig
like,
was awful. The wig on
it was
Monster was awful.
horrible.
It was
And
terrible.
and then when I was looking at her stature, it's of course you're not gonna get anybody that resembles her fully. But it was just like there's so many women that you could have had for that it just like it really threw me off because it just felt so, it still felt playful and not really like, it gave the effect that it's supposed to give, but I just wanted it to actually resemble her more than just
Absolutely.
someone playing as her in a costume.
You know what I think probably happened though? Now that I look back, I think if I would say Monster Ripper was probably the biggest foreigner that is actually
Hmm.
shown in the film. And I
Yep.
have a feeling that like because this was actually a Japanese creation, they didn't pay too much attention to the casting of the foreigners. Not saying that is
Probably.
right, but I think that that's probably what happened because they took so much care when it came to
Hmm.
like just about every other casting to the point
Hmm.
where they were just probably like, all right, well,
Yeah, she was definitely one of their
top
at that
draws.
time top draws at that time. I'm trying to think of who else was over there. I mean, she was there. Then later on, it was Medusa, Rockin' Robin. Um, who else was Debbie Malenka, who's another goat. Okay. I would even say innovator because there were some things she was doing that she had no business doing. Um, it was like, girl, you can't just jump out here and do this against Ciara. Like, we just don't notice that this is something you don't do. Um, there was a lot of women that traveled overseas, but only a few stayed. The one Tori with the eye, Terry Podge, Reggie Bennett, who's another favorite, and then her younger sister, Jessie Bennett. They brought in a lot of guys in, but only a few really got to be in that spot. And Monster Ripper was in that spot for quite a while, and then she came home. I want to say she had got injured or something. She came home, and that's around the time when she got signed. And it's just wild because it's like when I first seen her appear, I was like, I'm so glad they put her in here because people don't really know about her prior history, and they don't realize like at that time she was one of those ones at that pinnacle, and I was shocked. I was shocked by the wig. I was shocked by the whole thing. But I was glad that they included it because I am so upset about that wig.
No, the wig is awful. No, the wig is legitimately awful to the point
It
to
don't
where
even look like her hair.
I think to the point to where when I watched it, I said, "Who this supposed to be?" I said, "Oh, oh, okay."
I was
I do. I think it also paints that contrast of just like I think Japan typically had a place for plus sized women
like, mm-hmm.
wrestling more so than the US. Now,
Yes.
like I think that has pros and cons, right? Because I think like you almost had to work heel. Like it just like yes, you could be bigger, but you could work heel. And I think for some people, I think that obviously that worked out well when you think about people like Dump, when you think about people like Monster Ripper, you think about people like Aja Khan. But I do think that also too, for a lot of these people, once you get pigeonholed in those roles,
It's
you
hard to get
know,
out of it.
it's hard that I think like people when you read more like about Aja Kong, like I think that's something that she's talked about, just like you're black and you're bigger. Yeah, you gonna be in
You're
that
always going to be
role.
on that side. Yep.
You gonna be in that role. So I think there's been pros and cons to it, but I do think that that allowed either you will be taken seriously, and I don't think that
Hmm.
wrestling had that. And I kind of do. I did wish that they had explored that a little bit more, of just what happened when these people did go over to America, of just like crush gals, was just a
Hmm.
huge thing in America, of like Dump and all these people, Bull Nakano, of just. I wish that they could have explored that a little bit more, and because I think that would have added to how big these women
Big
actually
it was.
and that's in the era with no social media. Like for you to create that type of buzz for yourself and that
Hmm.
type of like just that type of like reverence around your work with no social media, you're no international distribution, and people are still talking about you and thinking about you, like that's big, like that's gigantic.
That's the thing. Like now everything is a click, a
Mhm.
tap, a touch. Back then it was word of mouth, or you had to see it in person. People actually bum rush those arenas to see these matches, to see the performers. Whereas like now, we still have the same opportunities, but how many times out of 10 will people rather sit at home and watch a stream or
Absolutely.
watch for somebody to pretty much review it on the timeline as opposed to actually going to go see the actual thing? And I mean, in a way, it's good, but in a way, it kills us because then it takes away from that natural response.
Absolutely.
Those people were showing up at those shows, buying their merchandise. And what I thought was so crazy was like they had both booths set up. They had the baby faces and then they had the heels, you know, or when it first began, you just seen the baby faces. Then when it was like when we got to her retirement, then we saw the dump
Mhm.
side. And then it was just like, wow, like, now they're buying her stuff because she's retired. But, back then it was like, I'm not buying the heel stuff. I'm not a heel. I don't want to be a fan of heel. And you saw that outline throughout this series that, we've seen plenty of wrestling documentaries talk about kayfabe and you couldn't ride with this person. I mean, we all heard the stories about Iron Sheik and, them riding together in the car and getting caught for nefarious reasons. But, back then it was so strict, even with the territories, that you could not ride with the heels. The baby faces had to be the baby faces. And one of the main reasons was because you had fans that would recognize you out in public. And if they see you hanging out with the dude you just bashed head in, 2 nights ago, they're going to be like, what? Like, it's confusing. So to see that Japan also had that same culture, and I feel like to this day they still somewhat have that.
They 100%. I think they protected a lot more, and I think especially because they were women, I think that they protected even harder.
Hmm.
They did a really good job, I think, of illustrating in that series the sacrifices attached to being a heel, and how
Yes.
they did a really good job, I think, of interwoven it, like of how it affected her personal life, her
Hmm.
relationship with her parents, not being able to go out in public, right? Your peoples
Yes.
can go out in public without they call arounds on your peoples because of something
Yes.
you did on TV.
And the thing is, it's like I've seen, like, there was a point I used to watch shoot interviews, and I've sat there and listened to old time wrestlers talk about, you know, they will be on the road and then they call home and then they find out like something at home's been vandalized because the fans seen you doing
Yeah,
something on TV. And so to see that not only were they dealing with that, but to see that she putting a chain around Jagusa's neck would incite people to not only vandalize her home with her parents, vandalize her father's working truck. First of all, I don't know why that man had a truck in the first place, so he wasn't going to no work. Okay,
you know,
um,
I wanted to talk about that too because
we gonna talk about it
sir,
because sir.
I never
And
saw you at work. The
and
shoe
then to
pulling up.
right, and then to see how not only did it affect them because they're coming out seeing this, but they're getting death threats. Then her sister gets dumped because she's the sister of Dump Matsumoto. Like people really took it as like this is a real life situation. I
It was
can't
a
associate with you.
but that also shows of just like we talk about real baby faces of
Mm,
Chigusa Nagaya was one of the greatest baby faces of all time. Of just and people were ready to kill about her. Of just
yes,
the
they
genuine
didn't play by Gusta.
horror. The genuine horror. Like I think of just of raw emotion. Like very few matches I think in history have touched that level of emotion of that first hair versus hair match. And that, what I also think was really cool is just like, and I think like there's a lot of different ways to watch this series. I think there's a lot of different ways to tackle it. But I remember like the first time that I watched it, I went into it kind of like with my TV on, and I had my phone in one hand and I have this list, and like I'm just going through it. I'm just like, okay, what's fact, what's fiction, but also let's go watch the matches, the actual matches.
Hmm.
I recommend doing that. Like if you haven't, I remember like after like that first episode, I watched the Jackie versus Maki retirement match, and
Hmm.
after the fourth episode, watching the Dump versus Chigusa hair versus hair match. I do hate that they didn't include both hair versus hair matches, but like I said,
Yeah.
you can't have it all. But I did wish that they had like included both. But like the when but it shows you how good the series is because when you watch that first match, they really captured most of the sequences,
Yes.
most of the violences, and they really did a really good job of it, I think, capturing the crowd reaction.
Hmm.
For that, it genuinely felt like a horror scene. Like it felt like she was going to kill her. She
Okay,
like
because I was sitting there like I was like you know like when they panned to the crowd and they were like freaking out. I was like, girl, I'm with y'all too, because
Mhm.
I don't know what's going on. Like you get lost in the series, And I was telling people this the other day. I was just like, even if you don't understand it, watch it because then you'll understand why this is such a big deal, why this is so important because you get lost. Even though I've seen all the matches, um, I feel like I've seen a couple of those matches a few times, so I'm familiar with the layout. Even when I watch them back, even watching this series, I get lost because you get so wrapped up into it because that crowd reaction, the crowd really lets you know, oh my God, this is not good. We need to be scared. Chigusa, get up, stand up, something, get up. Like it was, you would have thought Chigusa, like you said, was being murdered right in front of us. The way they
And,
were
I will
acting.
say, they did a good job of making it look like she was. Just
Yes.
and it also just shows how provocative I think a lot of times, especially for me, I'm 26, so I started
Hmm.
watching wrestling in 2006. I was born in 1998, so all
Yeah.
this stuff happened before I was born. So whenever I watch
Right.
stuff, I'm typically watching it and like a silo. So I'm watching this
Hmm.
one match on YouTube randomly to see the match, but you might not have all the backstory behind it. And I think that was the
Hmm.
cool part about this series of like seeing all the little things that leading up, even from, for example, like you see from episode one to Karu, she discovers wrestling and she becomes this
Hmm.
huge Jackie fan, and she's like this idol stand, this beauty parasite
Yes.
to becoming the killer of a crush girl gal of just
Which is
it's
crazy.
like it's such a great thing. Even like you see like the execs, they're arguing in the office of, can we show this on air? How are we gonna show this on air? Chigusa, is she gonna win? Of like arguing of like, are people even going to, are they gonna take this off air if they see women going at each other
Yes.
like this? It shows how revolutionary the stuff that they were doing. And even if you go back to the numbers, like to this day, the TV ratings that they were doing have not been matched. At
Mm-mm.
that time, not by any men in Japan, not by any men in the US, not anywhere, of just it was a the things that they were doing were genuinely revolutionary. I think we throw out a lot of terms now about legends and icons, and
Yes.
this was legitimately iconic. And I think even when you think about heels of in the 80s in Japan, yes, there were a few, I think, male heels, but for the most part, Dump and her army were the greatest in like just around the world. Like
Mm,
actual heel work that if it probably happened today, people wouldn't be able to take it. Like people would not be able to take it of just it was absolutely just next level. And I think also Chigusa Nagayo of just seeing how they continuously pushed wrestling culture forward of just like no, I want to wrestle this style, I want to wrestle a harsher style, actually I want to bleed in matches, I want to do this, I want to do this, and do just constantly pushing the envelope of what women's
mm-hmm.
wrestling could be. And I think like it was just so fascinating, I think too, of just that paired with I think just the sheer, I would say the popularity of the Crush Gals at the time of just
Yes.
the pride that they had in like in that role of I remember of just the one when Chigusa kind of went rogue and then they beat her ass in the locker room and then Lioness Oscar said, "Well, they only here for us anyway. They only really pull up for us anyway."
And
Like
it's crazy because like even with that scene, and I remember reading stuff about a little bit about them because especially when I got into Joshi, like you knew they were the Crush Gals, but you did not understand how big it was until you went back and watched stuff, and you're just like, Jesus Christ, everybody has on Crush gear in the audience. Oh my God, they got banners, they got posters. Oh my God, they performing in the rain, and you know. If you're not used to seeing that, like we've seen wrestling acts trying to be singers and stuff like that. But it was just like idol culture is totally different. So when you see that, and then when I got into it, Chigusa was pretty much retired. Um, Linus Asuka was she was semi-retired. She was still floating around, appearing here and there. And then when you read stuff about them, especially in their later years, when it comes to Linus Asuka, the one thing that sticks out in my mind is like when she was working with Arjun and she took over the booking and everything. And she angered a lot of the younger ones because she wanted to be the veteran, the hero veteran, and win everything. And a lot of them responded in the way of like, okay, we get it. You was one of the Crush Girls. You're responsible for us, but your heyday is over. So it's weird when I see that scene and I'm like, that's weird because you became the veterans y'all were criticizing. But the difference is you had the booking because they gave you carte blanche because of who you were. They didn't have that same access. So
absolutely.
it was just wild to see that. And then Chigusa, um, I mean, people have said a lot of things about Chigusa over the years. I think a lot of it is that Chigusa, she's misunderstood. Um, and watching this, I kind of, because I even had my own like bias against Chiguza. I was just like, I don't know what's wrong with this. This don't seem like she's about this. But watching this and kind of understanding that Mama came from basically abandonment issues,
Absolutely, yeah.
and the way she responded to, you know, anyone trying to be near her, she would latch on to one person. We seen her latch on to Dump when they first were training. And then when her and Linus came together, she latched on to her.
Mhm.
And then when she, at some point, she would feel like those relationships were going but so far, she would kind of like disappear. And when I was watching that, I was like, that sounds kind of true to what some people have said about Chigusa.
Mhm.
Uh, because she became that veteran too that was pissed off by all the rookies and stuff. And I think what it is with her, and I had this conversation with one of my friends the other night. I think what it was is that when she came into the business, she had in her mind what she wanted to do, how
Absolutely.
she wanted to revolutionize everything. And honestly, both of them helped change the style, but Jagusa, using karate when it was outlawed not to do that in the ring and still refusing and not giving a fuck and still doing it because she's going to wrestle her way
Mm,
did influence and change the whole perspective of wrestling for multiple generations. So imagine you're the one that helped change this. You're walking into these locker rooms a couple years later in the 90s, and some of them kind of give you either the stink eye, kissing up to you, and you still feel like either you didn't do everything or now you feel bitter because you feel like some of them were making a mockery of what you created.
absolutely.
So I think at some point she got a bad rep because she was carrying all of that on her. Instead of just vocalizing it. And then also with when we watched the series, anything she did, she was criticized by. Like, Linus Oscar, anybody else could have the same opinion. But it was like because it was Chigusa, the veterans really reeled in and focused on her and beat her up. And I think that also played a part into how things are now,
Hmm.
you know. And it's sad because it's like, I don't think she realized it then, but she played a very important part. But I think she wanted to do more. But I think at that point, she was just so exhausted, wanting to be done. And that schedule for idols back then was crucial because they were not only in the ring performing, they were training. Then there became a point where they weren't even training because they were being yanked and yoked and put here and there, sign autographs for this person, show up to these dinners, show up to these TV shows, go to the studio and make an album, film this show, do this and that. Like, we've seen a little bit of it where they kind of just didn't get a chance to actually enjoy it.
I'm glad that they touched on that too, of just of the toll, the physical toll that it took to be
Hmm.
everything of just. I think now we watch a lot of. You can watch like TJPW, you can watch Actress Girls, and right, like the idol, the dances and stuff. That's a part of the show, but
Yeah.
that's not like carrying everything. They, I don't think, and I think that they kind of were able to sum this up. But Crush Gals being so popular to the point to where an entire company can eat off this one act for years,
Hmm.
can blow out men's wrestling, can blow out international wrestling, can just become the hottest thing in the world. One act. That's a lot. And I think that too of just people, there's always going to be different opinions about, like I would say those two, but I will say that those women, and Dump is also in that conversation too of they are in very rare air. Like that is very
Yes.
rare air to say that you drew those type of houses nightly, you drew those type of viewers on cable nightly, you,
Hmm.
you sold this much merch, you became like, these are people who are cultural pillars. Dump's still doing commercials in Japan to this day.
Yes.
Like these are people who are cultural pillars who became of just like, I think the closest thing that you could probably, the way that people still talk about like Hogan and Flair here in US, you can put the Crush Gals in that conversation, and honestly,
Hmm.
you can maybe say that they did more, right? And to say that
Probably.
the short amount of time that they were together and the cultural impact that they had long
And they
term,
did so much.
and going being
That's
able
the
to go
thing.
to the US and like they are people, hanging outside their rooms like they the Beatles. And it's just that is very rare air. And I will say, specifically for women's wrestling, how many people do we know who have actually been able to touch those levels of success? Very few, if
Not
any.
many.
Like if any. And of just, it's a very, they're in very rare air. And I think that they did a really good job of kind of showing how lonely success was for them.
Yes.
All they
That
had.
was one thing.
I think it was a
Yes.
really good moment in the Chigusa Nagayo Dump Matsumoto match in the show where Linus Oscar is yelling from the apron. She's saying, "Get up! You're a crush gal! You're
Yes,
incredible. Get out.
that was amazing.
Mhm.
Like even what you were saying about like with nowadays, even back then, there's not many women you can say that had that same pinnacle of success. I mean, Americanized size. I mean, we seen Trish Stratus be big, deal for WWE. We seen her do television appearances. I mean, China. I would say
Yeah.
China would probably match somewhat of their success. Um, but like nowadays, it just blows my mind because it's like when I was watching that and just like thinking like, man, like we don't get that much often. And then the crazy thing is, when I was watching it for the third time, I had the nerve to open up Twitter. I don't know why. And there was these people debating on Twitter as usual about, the glass ceiling for like Bianca, Jade, and all these. And I'm sitting there like, why do us fans constantly holler about the glass ceiling from a company? But we also push down a glass ceiling too, because it's like we're seeing these women nowadays be able to branch out from underneath the company's umbrella, do other things. Like Bianca's got her own reality show. She does this, she does that. I mean, Baby Girl does so much stuff that I can't even keep up with, honestly.
She was on
And
my
I don't
show,
know.
my Bel Air show on Peacock. That's one of my favorite shows.
That's what I'm saying. Like, she's doing so much that it's like, I don't know how her head is not spinning. And then, I mean, Jade, she's done several things, but I feel like there's got to be that moment where she really hits it and it's just like, that's it.
Yeah.
We've seen so many of those women of this era get those opportunities, mainly because we now have different people backstage that actually say, no, go ahead and do it. Whereas 10, 15 years ago, they were like, the Bella twins have talked about this multiple times.
Absolutely.
That not only they were, but so many women within the Divas division were approached for multiple things, movies, TV, different things, and the company would turn it down before their agents would. You
Mercedes
know,
talked about it too. She talked about how WWE didn't want her to do the Mandalorian.
yeah,
Like,
and it's the same with Mercedes. It's like
yeah,
now we see them get to do other things. So then when I see fans react to that way, I'm just like, you guys would not survive idol culture.
it
You
didn't.
would
But you
not.
wouldn't know what. That goes back to, like, I think in the series of it really was made very clear, and it goes back to beauty pair of, if you're not performing for the company, it's just not allowed. If it's
Hmm.
not to do of just, but I also think too that goes back to that rare air comment of just, there are very few acts, male or female these days, that can honestly say that their name is bigger than a company,
That
and
is
bigger than the
true.
company's brand itself. And that goes for every company. Like, of just like, even as big as Roman Reigns is he bigger than the WWE brand? No. Of just, there
No.
are very few. I'm not sure if there's a wrestler alive today who is active who they can say like their name is bigger than the company. Of
Yeah.
just, these were women who their names was bigger to the point to where when they started promotions of their own, people actually went.
And they didn't care nothing about the company. They didn't ask, are
They
they
didn't
cutting?
care.
They, they did not care. Like, I feel like even if you went back to the Attitude Era, I mean, the main ones that stand out to me was, Stone Cold Steve Austin,
Mm-hmm.
The Rock, um, and even when it comes to the women, I would say China, because there became a point where, China's making appearances on late night TV, with David Letterman and stuff, and they would just say China. They would never say WWF champion, even if she had the belt. They would just say China, because at
Absolutely.
that point she had moved beyond that company, and this is before her departure.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been very few people that you could say that like now we there's always a debate of, are we going to call Dwayne The Rock Johnson, or are we just going to call him Dwayne or The Rock? Like,
Absolutely.
because he has moved to such a space where it's like he's been so successful, he's been in so many movies and stuff that it's like, yeah, we know he's a movie star now,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of us remember him from what he started from. But when you say The Rock, you don't say former WWE. That is no
No,
longer a part of it.
there's
It's
so
The
many
Rock.
people. There's a full generation of people who genuinely either just found out probably from this year's WrestleMania, or they
Hmm.
don't know that he was a wrestler at all. I think
Yes.
also too, when you think about The Rock's career in comparison to a lot of his peers, his career was very short. I think
And
what
it's
only
crazy.
8 years, but that's the thing of just that's the difference. I think that's a real mega star in the sense of like we're
Hmm.
talking about beauty pair, like we're talking about crush gas. You don't have to be before you're long. We ain't gotta
No,
be before you're long, like they say in the church. We ain't gotta be before you're long to have that level of impact. I do think though, when you look at the women, look at how much that they sacrificed to give it up. Of what they said, what is it? No alcohol, no
no
boyfriend,
smoking.
no smoking.
And yep.
Like it genuinely had become your life. And somebody even said this on Twitter. They were just talking about like they didn't even they talked about it when they asked like Dump to like lose to Chigusa and everything, but the pay was piss poor.
Yes.
The pay was piss poor. Now that is one thing that a Japanese and American women's wrestling had in common. They don't like
Hmm.
talk about it as explicitly, but the pay was piss poor. And when you think about the money that these women were bringing in, of just
Like you would think that it would equate balance it out, but no, like because I think a lot of people kind of forget it's here in America, whether you are Joe Schmo on the indies, whether you're working for the big companies on TV, someone has to pay for something.
mhm,
And the difference is with the big companies on TV, they have a full roster of people. They can interchange people left and right. Indies, they have to pay to book these people to come in, and you always have to have other people on standby in case, because the card is always subject to change. In this case, with All Japan, it was nothing against them. It's not their fault. This is the structure they brought themselves into. When they would get a big star, they based everything around them.
yeah,
The revenue had to be the source of that person. You can be on the card all you want, but the main merchandise you're going to see there is theirs, the big stars. If there's a secondary big star, you're going to see their merch there. They were the main ones that was selling and bringing in the house. So of course they're going to be on every card because that's going to be the money makers. But the sad part is that when you put yourself in that little caveat, you kind of sacrifice everything else because
absolutely.
you should be building up everybody else to be that same way. But they were in the old school structure of you have Bruno on the card, everybody's coming to see Bruno. Everybody else can be around Bruno, but they're coming to see Bruno. So
Absolutely.
Bruno had to be the headliner, he had the main event, and Bruno had to win because if Bruno did not win, it was going to be a problem if San Martino did not win. And they structured everything like that. And I think towards the 90s, especially when we had the boom of Joshi during Meltzer's favorite era, um, they, because that's his favorite era. He still talks about that. I'm just like, Dave,
Can
it's like
you
30
please
years
watch
ago.
some other wrestling? Please,
Like,
God.
I get it. I love it. But it's like, if you really sit there and think about it, it's like, that's like 30 years ago.
Yes.
Like, we've got to move.
Please, like you stuck in the past. I think it's so interesting too. Like one thing that like before we like started recording, one thing that I've been looking up is like the ages of like so many of the
Mhm,
women that are in this series and like
mhm,
if they're still active or not. And it's so interesting because that's another really good point that I think
mhm.
was brought up in the film of just because that there's always people like in Stardom, like there was always the jokes about like cosmic angels being like the grandmas of of Stardom and stuff.
Mhm.
It was a really good point of showing like where that started from, of like the forced retirement of Jackie. Like you couldn't go past 25. How these
Five.
women were literally building, they were building the infrastructure for the women's wrestling, the Joshi wrestling that we see today in real time, of just the JWP came out of that. Gaia eventually comes. So many of these different
Mhm.
promotions come out of that, of women having an extended career. Even me looking like Jaguar Yokota is still wrestling. She's what, 63?
Grandma Joshi. That's what I call her. Grandma
She's
Joshi.
but she's a very interesting figure, I think, of just somebody. And I need to start writing down when people say stuff. So please charge it to my head and not my heart. But somebody
Mhm.
on Twitter said there was a shift, significant shift over the last 10 years about who is considered the GOAT. And they were saying like
Mhm.
typically about 10 years ago, if you ask somebody, they would say Jaguar Yokota. And like, but if you
Mhm.
ask people in recent years, they'll typically say Minami Toyota. Not that either one is bad. Either both of them are
Right.
obviously GOAT potential. But it's so interesting of just shows of how even in the series, it shows how Jaguar, as good as she was often overlooked.
Yes.
But it also shows, and like I thought of Mercedes here specifically, of when she needed a character refresh, she
Mhm.
went to another territory. So she went to
Mhm.
Mexico for a while. She does this extended excursion. And because
Yep.
I think now, with the globalization of wrestling, we get really excited, as we should. I think when, this person can pop up here, this person can pop up there. Like, your favorite American wrestler can be wrestling in Arena Mexico. Your favorite Joshi wrestler can wrestle in, Wembley. We'll have people wrestling in the
Mhm.
Tokyo Dome, but that's how things were. That's how they used to be.
Yep.
Like, this was the foundation for making that happen. Of, Bull Nakano, Akira Hokuto, they were in CMLL. They were CMLL World Women's Champions. Like, they
Mhm. Bull was inaugural.
exactly this none of what we see today, and like the Mercedeses and the Stephanie Vackers and the women and the
Yeah.
Willow
No one
Nightingale.
just pops out as
None of this
so
is
and so
new.
back then. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think like this is one of those things of just shows of where a lot of those concepts come from. And I think that
Mhm.
out of all the people in the, I've seen people say like out of all of the people in the series of people who were probably underexplored, Jaguar is probably one of them, of just her
She
impact
is.
and the innovation that she brought specifically, to wrestling, to not just women's wrestling, but
Mhm.
wrestling in general. Like so many moves she invented. Like
Yes.
he originated the Tiger Driver. You see people like Will Ospreay building whole programs on TV around this
Mhm.
movie. Like that was the whole build to Wembley Stadium about Tiger Driver. That was invented by Jaguar.
I
At
feel
least
like
the first iteration of it.
with Jaguar Yokota, I think what it is that like, I call her Grandma Joshi. I've been calling her Grandma Joshi for years. And I call her that not because she's old. I call her that because how Nicki Minaj always say these bitches is my
And my
sons.
sons.
And I'm like, when I first got into Joshi, and you know how like you get to curious. Back then, Wikipedia used to put everybody's moves on there and stuff
Mhm.
like that. And they'll tell you innovative and stuff. Wikipedia, get back into that. That used to be very intriguing. Um, and I remember doing a deep dive on her, and I'm like, she made this move, she made this move, she did this. And then they had a whole list of everybody she trained.
And it's
And
everybody that you know.
everybody, and I'm sitting there like, ma'am, stop training people. This is too many already. And it's like, when you do realize it, even when she's taken her excursion away from wrestling, she comes back and she continues to train. She continues to wrestle. And it's like now she works with Diana, and she's trained all those people. And it's just like she's trained at least, I would say maybe three generations
and
of
it
wrestlers.
and the people that she's trained have continued to train other people, and it's
Yep.
just like I think that there's a lot of different. I talk about this when I talk about typically like people like Kenny Omega, of just there
Hmm.
are some people who can influence, I think, wrestling through just their wrestling, but I think
Yes.
that there are some people who are just so transformative to where they can invent almost a whole new philosophy of wrestling to that
Hmm.
influence people, of just not just what they're the things that they've done with their body, but the things that they've done with their mind. And I think the Jaguar is easily one of those people. And I think like what I love is just that the she's one of those. I think in the with all the idol stuff happening in the series, they
Hmm.
really did make her seem like a final boss as far as like the sport.
Yes.
Like
Because
they
at
made
that
her seem
time, she
like a
was
bench
considered
press.
that.
They made her seem like okay, like even if Crush doing this all this, you are still easily the best wrestler on the roster. And I think even the reverence that Lioness Oscar held for her, of saying like,
Yes.
I feel like for me to become the singles wrestler that I want to be, I need to beat you. I need to wrestle you.
Hmm.
You are the bar. And I think that that was just absolutely just. I think that that was fascinating. Of just truly, I think that the biggest takeaway that I got from this, and I hope that other people got from this, is that I need to watch more wrestling. Of just
Yes.
truly, I need to watch more wrestling. Of just there's so much. Like I think I've seen a lot, but
Mhm.
I want to see more. Like I think like we all
Mhm.
need to see more of just seeing how these different pieces come together. Even like seeing like a young Bull Nakano, why she was so special. Of and it's so weird. Like I don't know if you probably saw this tweet of mine, but a couple weeks ago, well, no, it's a couple months ago now. But
Mhm.
I tweeted about like how I'm building up my physical media collection. And I'm
Right.
building up my physical media collection. At this point, I only had like a couple tapes. I got like a WCW Sting tape while I was in Greensboro for Revolution Weekend
Mhm.
out of a comic shop. But like a couple tapes, couple DVDs, etc. I took a picture of it. This guy DMs me.
Right.
It's just like my wife has been begging me to get these tapes out of our garage for years. I'll just send them to you. He said, I got like all these Japanese tapes. I got old school WWE, ECW, etc. I said, well, I'll take all the Japan tapes. Um, I'm
Yeah.
expecting just one box, right? Like I'm expecting like just one box worth of tapes.
Right.
And keep in mind, so the hurricane hits right after that. And so all my mail is held at the post office because they weren't doing
Right.
deliveries around that time. So like things finally calmed down. So I go to the post office and I go pick up all of my mail. There's 5 boxes worth of tapes. 5 boxes full of
Oh
VHS,
my god.
at least 100 tapes. There's stuff from All Japan men's wrestling, All Japan women's wrestling. There's stuff from Noah, Toriyamon, like not even Dragon Gate, Toriyamon, like OG. There's stuff from
And that is never really found.
no,
Toryumon.
no. There's stuff Battle
Jesus
Arts.
Christ.
It's like the it's
And we don't ever see that.
I know Battle Arts. It's just like it's like best of Ultimo Dragon, best of
Oh my god.
Jushin Thunder Liger. There's some old best of the Super Juniors tapes. Oh my
That's
gosh, you gonna love this
insane.
one. It's at least 12 Arcene tapes. At least 12.
Yeah, because you can hardly get a hold of that now.
Also, so I do want to say I'm in the process of digitizing them all. So I found a
Hmm.
lot of digitizer off Amazon. I've started with the women's wrestling tapes first. So I've
Yes.
but the first one that I opened was what was it? Was it Dream Rush? All Japan Women's Dream Rush. And so like
Hmm.
this after this is after Queen of Villains. So it's after that era. This,
Right.
you know, and it's so interesting seeing like the deep contrast with how women's wrestling is portrayed afterwards. Of just by then, that harsher style is the norm. Ain't no
Yep.
singing and dancing. You got
Nope.
Dynamite Kansai, you got Aja Kong, you got Bull Nakano, and
It's
you
normal.
and they whooping people bad.
Yeah, it's normal. It's
It's so
normal.
normal, and it was just so fascinating to see how the culture shifted in such a short period of time due to people like Chigusa and Dump, of like the things that they were doing. Of just like I'm still making my way through like obviously some of the tapes, but like I'm probably not going to be done with these until years from now. But it's just absolutely fascinating to see how the culture around women's wrestling evolved.
Hmm.
And just like in of I don't want to say if I'm not sure if I could say better or worse because obviously like they never were able to like recapture a lot of those heights, but I
That's
do
true.
believe that they were able to like maintain a different level of popularity based off of that harsher style that didn't even include idol culture for such a long time. It
Hmm.
makes like the All Japan women's era is just so special. I think it just makes it so special and so interesting of just seeing how they transformed over time. Just how they transform over time and like how
Yeah,
their
because they.
minds changed.
I
But
think
you,
what it is. I think what it is that when you had Chigusa, all of them coming in with a different style, it would have been crazy if they, after Dump retired, Chigusa went her way. Lioness Asuka kind of went her way. It would have been so crazy for them to go back to what it was. Like it never happened.
Absolutely.
Like at that point with when Chigusa retired, you had a lot of classes being cycled in AWP. A lot of new women being trained. So when I want to say when Chigusa retired, by then you had your Bulls and Aja Khans, all those coming in. It would have been so controversial to go back to what it was when these women seen this, and this is what brought them here. So I think they had to realize like this is the moneymaker. This is what's going to draw. And then I think also I don't really think American wrestling played a part in it too. Because if you look at that time warp, um, WWE side, they were very cartoony. Um, you had the rock and wrestling connection, and then towards the 90s, it stayed a little cartoony. The territories were out of here.
Yeah.
And I mean, you had a few territories that toted that line like world class, especially with the Von Erichs versus the Freebirds, which started to get really violent. You had other promotions, especially like within the Jim Crockett promotions, that would have those blade cage matches and everything, but no one really, based on what I can remember and what I've seen, no one really toted that line. It
Mhm.
was more so, let's tote this line for this one match because we got to really sell this, but let's reel it back to where this is not a normal chaotic scene all the time. And then, of course, later in the 90s, we had, grunge, all of that take part and playing a part of how music, fashion, everything was changed, and wrestling later on with the Attitude Era and stuff like that. But with the women, it just would have been crazy if they went back to what it was because then it became the normalized monsters, the villains actually being villains.
Absolutely.
And one thing that really highlighted it for me in the series is that Devil Masami was one of their big heels at that time.
Yeah.
And nowadays, you really kind of don't hear much about her because Mama's retired. She's not out there scaring nobody anymore. But she was one of their big heels. And even when you watch matches of her from way back in the 80s, there's some matches of hers from like the late 1970s that's gotten uploaded on YouTube. Baby, I don't know who got those tapes, but thank you.
God bless
And
you.
you can see how opposing she was, just not just like physically, but just like facial wise. Like she gave that facial expression of like, I'm gonna rip you apart, but I'm gonna rip you apart without actually shedding blood. And then if she did attack them, ringside, she would get a little bit of blood. But you seen in the series when she got so pissed off at Dom. She was just like, what are you doing? You're going too far. And what she was saying is like, we only did a little bit of blood to scare the audience, shock them. Dope was dragging them around the ring, hitting them in the head, beating them up, bleeding some more.
Hitting the
And
audience
that
too.
grew, and then that gruesome, like the crimson mask that we always, accustomed to. That was so shocking because I think at that point they didn't even go that far with the bloodshed.
No. I think that they did a really good job, I think, of drawing that contrast as well between, like, because when we first enter this series, the heels that we see Monster Ripper, or later we see Devil Masami, but
Hmm.
they're just basically like, they do. I mean, Monster Ripper, she's just imposing, like
Yeah.
she's just imposing. So she just it makes sense for her to just bulldoze through everybody. And Devil Masami, like you said, just doing a little bit to go a long way, and it shows
Hmm.
how dump changes the complete culture of what it means to be a heel in wrestling, and also of just testing the extremities of just like the bloodbath that was that first hair versus hair match. You wanna know what's crazy? When I went back and I watched, I said,
Hmm.
this shit is 12 minutes.
Yes.
12
It's
a
short.
12-minute match is probably one of the most culturally significant matches of all time. 12 minutes. But it also shows it, in my opinion, I always like to say it separates the good from the great, because
Yeah.
some people, guess what, when you really know what you're doing, You don't always need 60
You
minutes.
long
I love
that
a
is
good
true.
epic. I love a good epic. Don't get me wrong. I love a good epic. I live off a good,
Hmm.
especially in Japan. I love a good epic. However, to be able to provoke a crowd to you ruin so many children's day. You ruin a parent's day. You ruin Shagusa day. You ruin everybody's day. You ruin everybody
Everybody's
at
day.
home is scarred. 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Just absolutely just it
And
just
the
shows
best,
how good she was.
and that's the crazy thing, because like even with watching back the series for the third time, and that stood out in my mind because it was just like I was like, because the series, it makes you seem like these matches are long like Broadways,
Yeah.
and I'm like, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, hold on, that hair versus hair match wasn't that long. I remember that wasn't long. And then when they really showed how it broke down, I was just like, thank you. Like really showed that this match was very short. It broke down early because she knew what to do. She knew what to do because she was so good at it. She knew how to get the attention. She knew that we don't need to slug it out for 60 minutes. I'm going to cut her hair. I'm the dastardly heel. This is how it's going to go over. And then when you seen it all break down to that moment where they're holding her hostage and she's cutting her hair, and the way the crowd is reacting, the crowd doesn't even care that this match hasn't even been long. They're upset that Chigusa's long locks is being cut. And how dare don't Matsumoto, how dare these people assist her? How dare that this is happening? And it really sticks out in my mind because like even with the series, you had um it was mentioned in the series that hey, who was in the ring? I know it was Jaguar Yokota was in the ring. And it was mentioned they're not watching Yokota, they're watching
Yes.
Chigusa.
Yes, that watched Shagusa. Yeah, that he said that he was sitting in the rafter. He was sitting
Yeah.
up there.
And that made me go, you know what? That's funny because it's like you've had plenty of people within wrestling say something like that similar. I mean, you've had like Jim Cornette, and obvious controversy with him. You've had other people say that like when the fans stop watching the babyface and what the babyface is doing, that's when you need to be worried. They're not watching the heel because the heel is supposed to do what he's supposed to do.
Yeah.
But if they don't care what's going on with the baby face, you have lost the crowd completely. And I sat here and I was like, that is true. They always would say that when the fans are not invested in the baby face, you've lost the whole concept of the match. It doesn't matter who wins or loses, they don't care. They did not care that Yokota could have been stabbing her with a knife. They did not care. They were concerned about Chigusa. They were looking right at her. And I was like, that is a perfect point that when we do watch wrestling, you have some of us that just zero in on our favorite or we zero in on that one person. We don't think about the other person. And to me, that's just a testament to Yokota because Yokota was so skilled. She made everybody look good.
Absolutely. I was just about to say that.
And to me, it's like watching it, it was just like Yokota kind of understood her place, even with the whole situation with her and Jackie. And, of course she didn't want to do that. But with Jackie, it goes back to a lot of those women during that time. A lot of people think, because I've seen it on Twitter, because I put in the hashtag, and a lot of people think like Yokota retired Jackie. That's not what happened.
Hmm.
Jackie was aged out,
Yes.
like a lot of women. A lot of those women didn't even want to be done, but because of that age 25 thing, they were aged out. And Yokota has even talked about that recently. Like, I think someone brought it up, and she was just like, "No, I didn't. I didn't retire her. She was aged out. That was the rule then." And then Yokota, some years later, she had the same thing, and happened, and then eventually she went on about her business. But a lot of those women were aged out, and I wish that there was more in-depth understanding of who all prior to Jackie Maki went through that whole situation.
Absolutely.
Because we read a lot of things, but like I just wonder what made them think let's start this 25. And I know it has to do with how they look at marriage and starting families and all that stuff, but it's like, I just wonder how many women, especially around that time, were forced into retirement, even when they haven't even hit their prime.
Absolutely, of just so many people from that era, because you have to think too, you're not allowed to date, you're not allowed to do anything. So like, and I think also too of just think about the culture of joshi wrestling, of
Hmm.
how early people are going in. Like I think they said
Yes.
Jaguar Yokota, she went in, I think the dojo at what, 16.
Yes.
Now you look at people like Azumi, go in at 9. Of just, I think, and I think also too of just, how do I say it, we've talked about this, like, people like Kazuki,
Hmm.
right? Like 26.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's a problem, but what happens is a lot of times you start so early and
Hmm.
you'll have so many successes, I think, on the front end of your career. By the time you turn 25, there's somebody much younger than you already moving in and they're pushing them as the face. And I think one of those people, I think Yatami is one of those people right now. Is so
Hmm.
her career is so interesting because she had so much of these grand, gigantic successes on the front end.
Yes.
Because you're like, this young prodigy, but now you get to around 25, 24, 25, the rest of the scene, everybody, so many people are elevating, doing these different things of just
Hmm.
how do you stand out? How do you continue to stand out? And how do you top the things that you've already done
That
when
is
you
true.
started off so hot, of just going in, like, winning the red belt and just going on this, like, this iconic run. You're doing all that, like 20, 21, something like,
Yeah, she was a baby.
yeah. And so it's just, it's so interesting. I think maybe that has something to do with it too, of just how early these girls go in, of just, this isn't, they are going into a dormitory. They're living together. This is almost like college,
Yep.
this is like almost like college. And I almost can't even say college because how young they are, boarding school. That,
Pretty
probably
much.
that. It's a very interesting culture. And I think that it, especially at those beginning, like those 70s parts of, there's so many women who were left by the wayside,
Hmm.
and I think what also played into it is a lack of options, at
That is
that
true. Because
point
that was the only one around.
All Japan was the only, they were the only show in town. And that's why the women who were affected, they start building their own stuff, like,
Hmm.
and I'm really glad that they did include that piece in there of Jackie coming out of retirement,
Yes.
starting JWP, because I think like that also puts a lot into perspective. And they made it seem like she was so much older, but she was only a couple years older, like
Yeah.
barely 30, if she was 30 at all.
No, she wasn't even.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because it's like watching it in the series, they do make her seem like she's so old, but that also plays into the mindset at that time of when you hit 25, you know, they consider it like your biological clock is ticking.
Yeah.
And it, even with her and Mackie, when they had their match, they weren't even near 25. And
Mhm.
then of course she had her solo run, and when I tell you she walked in with that silver pants on that blouse, I was like, "Excuse me, Miss Jackie,
I
honey."
like to say, out of all
Like,
the actresses in the series, I think I'm most obsessed with that portrayal. Like of just Jack
yes,
looked like a boss. Like the bowl cut, like the
the
pants.
money,
It just
she oozed money, and come
absolutely.
here, darling, let me show you about
Even
wrestling.
like her getting
Like,
into the car of like, of just like, yeah, where's my driver?
just
It's like
elegance.
absolutely.
It was just so, like, when they showed up that night at the dojo, um, and she just walks, and I'm like, does she got on silver pants? Like, oh my god! And then it was like, even in the pictures I've seen of Jackie Sato from that time, I was like, I could see her wearing the silver pants and this blouse. Like, it was just like, it just magically in my head was just like, this goes together well. This is
It's the
how I would
attention that they
picture
paid to
her.
the casting. Like, it just goes back to like
Hmm.
they paid such close attention to detail. But and I think that also reminds me of another thing of too of just I think because of the idol culture, I think that's what and just like those attention to like the appearance, and like when you walked outside you had to look like a star, like you had to
Hmm.
look like a star. People had to identify as a star because there was no such thing as an off season of being a wrestler, especially
Yeah.
for them. You're always on. I think that's what made it even more poignant when they had the hair versus hair match and Chigusa's head gets shaved because of
Yes.
just so much of, you could tell so much of the femininity, so much of identity is tied to hair. It was tied to hair.
Yes.
But it also showed, I think, too, of just, you got to think after that, especially once we get to the 90s, I think
Mm.
that that probably played a role in, I think, women being able to not lean more into the less into those traditional beauty standards of, you'll see people with a lot more like, I don't want to say masculine, but like a lot more,
What would be considered more
yeah,
masculine?
masculine
Hmm.
appearance, of, and also all Japan building around those people of just, there's a lot of women who aren't like, cutesy idol, like no, these people look like actual killers who will hurt
Yes.
you. They have shortcuts. Dynamite Kansai look like Jordan Von Strangle from Fairly Odd
Or
Parents.
as or Dusty would say, Miss A, I like Miss A. You
Mhm.
know.
And it's so interesting. It felt like that was a watershed moment, kind of like for the culture to kind of like expand in those ways of just, because at that point I felt like it was a very, think about even Dump as a heel. Everybody's wearing these singlets with the crisscross
Singlets,
back, and they got
the
the,
same
they
old
might got their name on
design.
the side, and they got their name on the back. It's very much so like a
Cookie
cookie
cutter.
cutter, very cookie cutter. Even like with Crush Gals, like obviously like they had the short haircuts, but everybody had a short haircut back then. But
Hmm.
it's so interesting to see how like they evolved, like the style, and like what's considered acceptable of just like, you can
Right.
tell that the work that they did during that time really changed and expanded the perception of what women's wrestling could be.
Yeah, because like even with the haircuts and stuff like that, based on what I remember is that a lot of them did cut their hair short because, especially with training and stuff, their long hair just made them feel hotter. So that from the very beginning, a lot of those older Joshis had that short hairdo. You
Mm-hmm.
had a few of them that had the long locks, but it was not like a. Even when you go back and look at old photos, you knew that that haircut was like that was the standard. And then the singlet, and it's also the same when you look at American wrestling at that time. I mean, of course, you had your Peggy Levers and different women running around that were trained by Moolah. But even if you go back to the days of Mildred Burke, and you had those women that she trained, everybody was super polished. Everybody's not a curl out of place, and everybody was just so. How would you say? I say it's like golden era Hollywood picture show.
Yes,
Like
yes,
everybody was just so like presentable to the point where it was like this is beautiful, but I don't believe that this should be what I think when I see you in the ring wrestling. And then they had, of course, the singlets, the polished sing. Everybody was so pristine that even years later, when you had like Wendy Richter and different ones kind of doing different styles, like Luna Vachon, when she first started wrestling, she had the tight curled hair, pretty girl. And when she shaved it, it was considered controversial because it was like no one's doing this. And mind you, there was a couple of girls in the territories that did things like that, but it would still be treated as this is her being masculine, and then all of a sudden
absolutely.
she'd be marketed as like the masculine wrestler. Meanwhile, sometimes wouldn't even be that big of opposing in size to her adversaries, but it was considered this is not what women do. So when you have with the Japanese side and Chigusa pretty much hiding out in her house because she doesn't have her hair. And, as an idol, she's known for her hair, how she looks, how she dresses. And then you have that little bit of femininity taken away from her. And you just see that not only is she ashamed of, the sacrifices she's made and feeling down on her luck because everything's just all around her. She's overwhelmed. You see how just that one thing just
Hmm.
crushed her. And then years later, like, even when you've seen Bull Nakano, like, I tell people all the time, like, yeah, you guys are used to seeing Bull Nakano pictures of her and Aja Kong and all them with the mohawks and stuff, but there was a time that that was considered like a no-no.
Yeah,
Like, you had to look uniform. So years later, seeing that that's like a, it's like, okay, girl, she shaves her head on one side, she shaves down in the middle, she shaves just the undercut. Okay, like it's a normal thing because I think as times change, they realize we have to let everybody look different. Because
um,
even thinking back on it, it's like, how did you have your peels and baby faces looking exactly the same?
absolutely. I think too of if you look from the first episode to the last episode, and you see the beauty pair era
Mm-hmm.
to Dunk's retirement match. As far as from a presentation perspective of like the women in the individuality perspective, it's
Mm-hmm.
night and day. Like it's absolutely night and day, and that's just then. Once we get to like the '90s and stuff, like and to the 2000s, then everybody starts looking different. Like but
Yes.
it's very clear. Like even down to like the formula, right? Of from
Mm-hmm.
pair to crush gals, they're just like, okay, we want a two-person duo. One person's gonna wear blue, one person's gonna wear red.
Red.
Of just we gonna do this, we gonna do this, and it's gonna hit these checkpoints. Bop,
Mm-hmm.
bop, bop. It was a very cookie cutter, era of like, but I think also too of just some of those things have left us, but some of those things still remain. Of just it never. Women always have to be seen as polished, presentable, respectable ladies. Of just we still see some of those elements. I think like the concepts are still there. They're not as I would say as largely enforced
Mm-mm.
as as they once were. But I think the concepts are still there. Even though what I will say, some of the pageantry that was expressed here, I think we should bring some of that back. I do think like of
I
just
miss. I
it looked
wish.
big. Like it just felt big. Like honestly, I have a dream. After I watched this, I was like, I want Sorry to wear one of them belts with the picture inside of it. I want her
Yeah.
to do that. I want
I
somebody to do that. I don't need, but I want her specifically to do that. I want her to take one of them belts. I want her to put her picture inside, and I want her to just go off of them on a mother tour.
it's the pageantry was, that is one thing that really stood out to me because even when they first announced the series, I said, if you don't put the pageantry,
Hmm.
that's gonna kill it for me. And just seeing how everything is, and I've always made this joke about with Joshi's over the years, and they highlighted in the series where everybody has a specific color.
Hmm.
I mean, Devil Masami was purple and black up until her retirement in 2008. And nowadays with Joshi, I mean, you still have some, like Sari has always been red.
Hmm.
Well, when she first started, she was like white and pink and blue. It was the Diana colors. And then when she got the gear from Ayumi Kurihara, who had patterned her retirement gear after Akira Hokuto, she gave it to Sari. So then that's when Sari started doing the whole red thing. You still see some of them stay with their colors, but now it's gone to where everybody has every color in it. So it's like it's a array of rainbow. Whereas years ago it used to be like, well, she's wearing orange. You can't wear orange. Not even red orange. No, get a different color. And then it's funny because like when you watch back like the old like HEW shows or like Big Egg Universe or anything like that, just a random Joshi show,
Hmm.
and it'll be like that one random wrestler come out there and you'll be like, I guess they chose all the colors because what is going on with your gear? What is going on? This does not go together. And that's how it was. Like if a performer was wearing white, nobody else could wear white. You could wear white in some, but you couldn't. Plum Rico, plum colors, purples. Nobody else could do that. Like everybody had their set colors because that's how they marketed everything. They had their set colors, series numbers and things like that because that's how they identified you. So seeing that in the series, because I used to always be like, Linus is blue and Chigusa's red. That's
And
interesting.
you want to know what though? I will say is that I think that played a big factor in how they were able to catch on in the state somewhat of just like no,
Mhm.
everybody can't speak Japanese, but if you make it pretty easy to understand of just like, oh, if I'm watching this, Tagusa gonna be wearing red, Lioness Oscar, gonna be wearing,
Make it easier.
Ev just it makes it easier, I think, to like overcome those language barriers and things like that when it just when you make it that simple. I think that there's pros and cons to it. I think sometimes like
Mhm.
I love when wrestlers change it up, but I think back to like All In, and I remember watching the 0 hour, and I was pissed because in that opening 0 hour match, why the hell is Brian Cage and Sammy Guevara both wearing Wolverine cosplay in the same match? What are we doing? And y'all are on opposing sides. Do men
Yeah, that
not
makes
have a
no
group chat?
sense.
Do men not have a group chat? Do y'all not talk to each other before this? And honestly, it really was Sammy's fault because Brian Cage wore them tights all the time. But
Right, and Brian Cage was actually going to be Wolverine at one time in
exactly,
wrestling. So it's like,
exactly.
why would you take my character? Hello,
I'm just
like
like, what are we doing? Like, I think that's too. It just reminds me of one thing that I love about that era of wrestling is that I feel like they were paying attention to the most minute details, like the little things, the little
mhm,
things that really, I think, go a long way. Of just don't get me wrong, I love that. I think that wrestling has grown a lot, but I do think that we can all do better. I think from a pageantry perspective, I think of
yes,
you treat it like it's the biggest thing in the world, people will receive it as such of, and I think that
yeah,
that's
because
the series did a really good job of like really treating it like it was the biggest deal in the world. They made it feel like All Japan Women's Wrestling was the center of the universe. Crush Gals, center of the universe. Dump, center of the universe. They did a really good job of like painting that picture, and I think that we could afford to borrow some of that for modern wrestling,
mhm,
men and women.
it like we really could use that, and it's like without the series, we see the Matsunaga brothers, um,
Mm-hmm.
and I kept saying like when I was watching it, I'm like, I know it was started with two, and then it was like three, and there was one. I'm like, how many of these people was there? So of course I went down the internet hole, and it's like five brothers, and come to find out that there was women on the roster that was related to them, cousins and stuff like that. And down in the family line, there's even more people related. Like there's just a whole triad of them somehow related. But like even watching them um politic about what's going to be the main event. No, we cannot have this be the main event because if we do, the next show is going to kill us. Like just the way they went back and forth on it, like every time that it was so important that like we can't book Chigusa not in the main event. They're going to come once a year. We can't book this person in the main event because they're not going to be happy with that. Like just the back and forth with that, and then also the politicking with TV, especially when Dump really was getting to that point where Chigusa was like, "You guys got to control them. They're going too far." With TV being like, yeah, what is going on here? We can't show that. What are y'all gonna do about her? Oh, she's not gonna do anything." And then she goes, does the most. And, just seeing them go back and forth with that, trying to see TV, trying to make the right decisions on shows. And also, what I thought was so intriguing is like when the whole scene happened with Dump, when she comes to herself in that rain, that scene with the rain coming down, she's got the chain, and she just waltz in and takes over that match. Mind you, the match had no involvement of her because Devil Usami had pretty much kicked her out of her army.
Yeah,
And just seeing how they were just like, they're not watching Devil. They're not watching Devil's army. They're watching her. And they just went straight with Dom. Like, just seeing them make that decision on the fly of like, no, we're going for it with Dom. That was so neat to see like portrayed because I always wondered like what made them go from Devil Usami to Dom so quick like that. Even watching old shows, like how did that just happen that quickly?
yeah.
Because
I
they
think
always made it seem on those shows like it was like a build up, but it's like seeing that it just
I think too of just one thing. What I did like about it is that I think it just showed that a lot of people get on the internet and like they think that they could be a booker, but they have no idea all the little
yes.
decisions that have to be made. And just like not even like when people be like, oh, well, you're owned by these people. It doesn't matter. You still got people to answer to. You know, like it doesn't matter
Yes.
if you privately owned, doesn't matter if you're a publicly traded company. Like if you on TV and stuff like that, and with more influence, with more money, becomes literally comes more problems. But I
Mhm.
also think too, it's one of those things about wrestling of we always talk about, oh my gosh, this such and such isn't given an opportunity and they need to be given and they need to be pushed. But truly, all of the most iconic and typically the most culturally significant movements in wrestling have always been spurred by somebody just flat out taking their spot.
That
But
is true.
let's just be real, and I think they did a really good job of kind of like showing that here too, of just there is never, almost never going to be a time where a veteran is going to say, "I'm going to roll over, sit down, and let you walk all over me."
That
They
is true.
it take my spot like that. That's never happened. Like that's just the game of the wrestling is a star driven
Mhm.
industry. You know, like some stars come, they go, they fade. You know, they get injured. Who knows? Like all sorts of things happen. But anytime, like if you want to actually push the culture forward, you're going to have to essentially take it. And I think like Dump is a really good example of this here of just, and we talk about the pageantry of Japanese wrestling, and then
Mhm.
we get to the 90s, right? And we have the rise of FMW, and you know, of like this crazy, they damn near blowing each other up and stuff of
Pretty
just
much.
the culture had to shift, like you know, of and so
Mhm.
we're seeing these bloody steel cage matches with women of just this is how the business evolves. And I think like they did a really good job of showing how that happened in real time. And I think that the picture that they painted with Dump is just absolutely gorgeous of just like her story. Like of course, like I I saw Dump Matsumoto for the first time in Stardom when she was like beating on
Mhm.
last year. That was the first time I saw.
Mhm.
And so to have you see stuff like that, but like you see her journey of her family, her story, like that thing with her daddy naming that new child her name. I said, uh-uh.
That was that
That I done
whole
seen some crazy stuff, but that was mm-mm,
the family dynamics
mm,
with her family overall, and it's like it was just so startling to me because I'm like you can tell there's some type of emotional issues here already.
absolutely.
You have her mother, which I couldn't really get like full like clarification on. Like when it starts out, her mother's already weak. You can't tell if it's like illness, drive. You can't tell if it's just age or whatever. She's just like really, really weak physically. So then that makes you already like, what's going on here? Then when you have the father, like in the first few scenes in the first episode where he just comes in and he's just money hungry, just
And
takes
take that lunch
every
money.
crumb, takes their lunch money, any crumb that they had, and the mother's like talking about how she's worked all these hours and clearly like looking at her physically, you're just like she's in no shape to be doing any of this. And he just takes the money and does what he wants to do with it, bulldozes in when he wants to, leaves when he wants to. And then when that scene where the mother finds out the address and pulls up on the side chick, and then she sees her holding the baby, and then she realizes that the two daughters had the same name. It was just like, one, how dare you? Two, it just like threw me because it was just like I wish her mother had divorced him. But her mother was still in that mindset, especially back then, where you married your husband, you stuck with him through and through, even if he made it another family outside. And then when she later on gets older, she's pretty much forced to go into the workforce against her own will, to help provide for her mother, her sister, the household, because the father's clearly not doing it. And the crazy thing is that she runs into this woman and she tells her, go live your life, do what you want to do. And that was like, and it was just so weird to me because it was like, this woman is a part of a traumatic experience for you.
Mhm.
And this is the one person that told you, like, hey, just because you're a product of him does not mean you have to be him.
Because
And
you can't tell no woman, like, it's just so, like, a woman who's dead set on being centered around a man, you can't tell her nothing. And I think that was also a
mm-mm,
recurring thing in the series too, of like she thought money could fix it. Like, of just she's trying to be, she thought, she's like, okay, maybe if I make money for my mom, she won't have to ask this man. Maybe if I do this
right,
for her, she won't do it. You think money could fix it, but like
that doesn't
people gonna
fix
do
it.
what they want to do. Like people gonna do what you want to do. I think the biggest part for me, I think that was probably the most betraying, was using her connection to Chigusa for the autograph
Yes.
just to pay for this man's stuff.
And could have got her blackballed, could have got, because back then, I mean, blackballing in the industry has always been a thing. But then, especially when you taking advantage of a big star like that, she could have got blackballed and never got to repair
Mhm.
her reputation, even though she didn't even cause it. And that part, like with the mother, it's like, okay, we excused him for being abusive. We excused him for his alcohol and his womanizing ways, betraying you overall, betraying the family, leaving your oldest daughter to have to fend for herself, make decisions that she shouldn't have to make. And then the youngest child, she was pretty much just watching it, not understanding. So it was like Dump really had, as they call it, oldest child syndrome, um, where she's forced into these situations and she shouldn't be because she's the child. And then
Mhm.
you have the younger sibling who sees her going on and living her life and actually doing what she wants to do and not because of what she should do. She sees it as betrayal. She doesn't understand it that we should be living our life. Like she just sees it as you're not being loyal, you're being selfish, yada yada, because she only has her view of it. But even with that, with the mother selling autographs, it was like you don't see that this is a problem. And that's like really what blew me when Dump came over there and confronted him about it. She was quick to protect the father and not say, hey, we shouldn't have been doing this, because she was too male centered. She was too ingrained in that thought that was taught that the man is the leader of the household, everything is centered around the man. She could not take herself out of that and understand, like, no, this is detrimental. This is
They were
actually a
like,
problem.
they said, yeah, well, he's been better since he got sick. Well, no shit, Sherlock. I would hope so. He ain't got nobody to take care of him.
Yeah,
Duh.
like she she really was like, the sister's like, he's a changed person. And that's when it like clicked in my head. I was like, she's a younger one, she's only seen a few glimpses of him, whereas Dump, being the oldest one, she's dealt with more,
All of him. Yeah.
because yeah,
Yeah. She's
because you
seen it
could see
all.
that there was an age gap between them. So
Absolutely.
like her experience was like the only few things that she seen. So it's like you're always going to be opposing towards your sister. And that was the sad part, because even when they get older and the sister experiences that traumatic breakup, it seemed like even in the series, she never got past that to understand that this is why the relationship is what it is. Even when she later on says, like, you're being just like your father. And it was just weird to me because I'm like, if she's being like her father, but y'all are just completely fine with this man laid up in the house. And I get it. They had nowhere else to go. But then what killed me was later on in the series, she moved him into a big house.
That's what
And
I was
then
just
with
about to say.
and then
They
she was
demonized.
facilitating their life. She was
Mhm.
paying for everything. And that's why it just like blew me when the whole selling of the autographs, and I'm just like, the mother cannot even see where this is a problem. Not even one time.
They demonized her for being
Hmm.
a heel, saying that it made their lives so much harder. You know what will really make your lives hard? Eviction. That would make your life
Yes.
really hard. You would know what
Yeah.
homelessness. That's what will make your life really hard. She was
Like,
paying for everything, and they still demonized her. And I think like it's just insane. Like I think I went into this series like thinking that oh, this is going to be a great wrestling series. I did not
mm-hmm,
expect to like connect with it on such a personal and emotional level and like
mm-hmm,
there's so many different things of just like I walked away from this series saying like I feel like I could show this to non-wrestling fans and I think that they would get something out of it.
yeah. Like,
Like
I
it was very
definitely,
powerful.
I wrote in my notes that don't Matsumoto, she really operated out before she even became herself. She operated out of seen but not heard.
Hmm.
Like, you seen her, the family seen her, but they didn't hear her. Even when
Absolutely.
she said, I want to be a wrestler, they didn't hear her. They only seen what she should be. And then when she becomes friends with Jagusa, she was operating off abandonment issues. And for both of them, Dump's seen but not heard, and Chigusa, she's heard but not seen. So they're going to likely come together as friends because they're going to give each other what the other one doesn't have. But later on, Chigusa gets seen and heard, whereas Dump is still in the seen but not heard,
Absolutely.
or as what she wants to be. And then when we have that transformation where she becomes Dump Maximo, which that scene was just like, I've seen the match where she comes bulldozing in there. I had no idea that that was what led up to it. Like, I remember one time being like, why is she like she dripping wet? What is going on here? Did not think it was she got pushed out the side of the house. First of all, that house. Who patched up that side of the house
I want to know
twice?
who did it the first time. Who patched it up the first time?
Because twice? Oh no. No.
And you
Like,
know
that
they
was
patched it up
insane.
after that because they were still living there until them people was harassing them to get out.
Yes. And that's one thing, like, that was insane. And I'm like, that's crazy that she went through this whole family situation prior to this, and that what kicked it off. And we got to see what we seen today. And it's like, you don't realize it, but like your family dynamics and things that you deal with lead you to certain places.
Absolutely.
And there was a lot of it that like I could relate to, and I'm just like, that seems like this, that's relatable, because it's like I feel the same way with you. Is like, I feel like I can show this to anybody else and they would understand, pick up on it. Because as soon as I started watching it, I was just like, she's the oldest child. She's going to be the one that suffers the most, because she's going to have to be the one that has to do all defending, all of this, and saying no, and then be bastardized for saying no. And we've seen that
I,
so easily.
I related to a lot of that of just being the oldest sibling. I think I was the no, not I think I was the first person in my family to graduate from college, and so
Hmm.
like my life looks completely different from everybody else's in the sense of the things
Hmm.
I do, the places that I went, like the jobs that I worked, right? And it's just like it easily, even though like there was times where like I'm sending money back home, I'm doing stuff like that, there's also in the same vein of you think you better than this, like you think you better, you think you're so smart now, you think you're so bad because you went to school and all these different things.
Yeah.
And I honestly think a lot of black wrestling fans will probably really benefit from this if you just open up, just like your I think you're just
Hmm.
just open up your mind to like other wrestling that exists of just like I think that especially families of color, I think there's a lot of interesting points that this series really brings up that I think that a lot of people could really relate to. um
Yeah, it's very relatable, especially with that part, because it's like we see these people on TV. Um, outside of like things like shoot interviews or the one series that everybody pretty much watches. I even know some people that are not even wrestling fans that watch Dark Side of the Ring. Um,
yeah. Mhm.
Outside of that, with the wrestlers actually detailing their home life, what led them to get into the business, and what outside of the business, personal wise, has caused them to have derailments in career or lead towards their death or things like that. Like we don't get to see that often.
Yeah,
Um, so it's like watching that, and then I think it's also with women. Um, People are so fine tuned to women being so strong and
right.
having to put on this face like everything is okay, that they don't realize that little nuances, like for instance, like Chigusa's parents just abruptly abandoning her. Like they don't realize little things like that can shape a woman into something else. Like Chigusa, up until that point, it seemed like she had a good family life, and then her parents took off because they were being chased by debt collectors. Um, and she developed abandonment issues. She, like I said earlier, she would just latch onto a person. She pretty much ostracized herself from everybody else. And I think that was due to the trust issues that she had gotten from her parents doing that, that she didn't trust more people coming in because she had that fear of what if they do it too. So that one little thing changed her whole perspective on things. And with women, we're so used to having people say, "Oh my God, you're so strong." I hate that quote. You're so strong. Girl, I have no choice. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, if I start crying, then you poke holes in that of why are you crying? Is it emotional? Is it a breakup? Is it this? Is that? And it's like, no, I'm just crying because I'm overwhelmed.
What did Whitney say?
Like,
I'm a survivor.
like we can't, we can never show the opposite. So it's like when you see this with Dove and you realize, like, up until that point when she transformed, she was a crybaby. She cried about everything. And they kept saying that in training. You just cry about everything. And it's just also with Bull. When Bull first appeared on the screen, I knew it was her. I said, it's Bull. I was like, Bull has talked about this, how she was such a crier about everything. Like, she would talk about she would watch romance shows and she would just cry the whole time. And seeing her, I was like, that's Bull. These were so emotionally wound up women, but because we don't see that and we just have these expectations and we only know the men in business to have that issue, that's why I hate when Dark Side of the Ring comes back and we never get women's stories. We only
Absolutely.
get like the fluff of it, like the, well, she did kind of have a drug problem. Did she kind of have one, or did she really have one? You
I
know, or
this show what I really one another thing that I really loved about it is that what you were saying of it told women's stories, and I think that it was these are women who are seen as the strongest of the strong.
yes,
And I think these are monuments. Like I said, these are people who live in rare air of what they were able to accomplish, what they were able to do in the world of professional wrestling. I mean, when you think about the Crush guys, even outside of professional wrestling, right? Of like, and they were doing it in their early 20s. Think
hmm,
and they had all of these familial problems, they had all these personal issues, like they were so young, and like the emotion, like peeling back the curtain like the way that they did and like showing those vulnerable bits and those sensitive bits, like it just shows of just I like that they humanized what being a strong woman looks like. And I think
hmm,
that we need more stories like that. I think the conversation that came out of that from so many wrestling fans was, oh my gosh, we need more projects. We need more this. We need more that. We need more this. And well, yes, I too would like to watch more biopics that aren't WCW related.
hmm,
I also think that that includes women's involvement of just even at, and I would say like probably like the last major point is the end and build the way that they built to like Dump's retirement match, her and Chigusa coming together, how
hmm,
special that was. Think about like wrestling now we rely on so many tropes. Some people they hate each other, they love each other, and then a year
hmm,
they'll team up of just like no, like years passed by after this legendary rivalry. She pulls her over to her side and says, I
hmm,
want to fight alongside you. Of just, these are real emotions, but it also shows you how much they protected kayfabe too. Of just, they
yes,
protected Dump as a heel till the very end. Of just, to the point to where that's why her telling this story now is so special because of like how hard they protected her as a heel. You know, like
Hmm.
they really protected that character. If you were watching her in the 80s back then while she's like, you know, beating Chigusa Nagayo's head in, you probably would never have even expected that she went through all this stuff. You know, of
Yeah.
just would have had no idea like the way that they humanized well, the way they humanized everything that her and all the other women were going through during that time of just it, I want to see more of it, like you said, like uh, but I think that's also the importance too of having women around to tell their stories of
Hmm.
about of like you mentioned China earlier, right? Of just China will never be able to tell her story. You know, of
Yeah.
there's so many people. Everybody wants to put out a China episode,
Mm.
this and this and this and that
I
and that.
hate it. I
Oh,
hate it.
I hate it as well.
I hate it. Like, some years ago, I wrote an article. I don't even know if I even have it in my archives, but it was around the time when Triple H appeared on Stone Cold Steve Austin podcast when they used to have it on network, right?
Yeah,
And he asked him about China, and uh, he made that quote about he didn't know about China being in the Hall of
Hall of
Fame
Fame because of her
because
porn career.
of a porn career. And of course, that set off controversy on the interwebs. And for me, at that point, because a lot of people don't know this, so when I was younger, when I got into wrestling, I had my bull Nakanos and all that stuff like that. China was my girl. I was a China psycho. I did a book report on China. Yes, I was not playing by her. I stood up and I was in the seventh grade. I stood up there and talked about Miss Joni Lauer like I knew her because I read her book. I had all my facts straight. And I used to get picked on for even being into wrestling. I did not care because she had, for me, made me feel like I want to be that strong woman, that I'm
Yeah,
seen, to not be scared to play games with boys or play kickball with the boys. Like, especially because I was a tomboy. So I did that anyway, but I would get ostracized for it. But
absolutely.
having her as a figure saying, like, no, you can kick these boys' ass too, and I mean, I did punch people in the face, but that's a different story. But
Me too.
she made me feel like it was okay to
Mhm.
be me. So when I did that book report and I stood up there and I was like, Miss Joni did this, she did this, I had a whole timeline, everything. And so when I got older, and of course she was on Surreal Life and stuff like that, when she did the whole porn thing, that just, I think then I was in my teens, going towards my 20s.
Mhm.
It shocked me because it was like, at that time I didn't have the understanding of autonomy, um the being comfortable with your sexuality. I didn't really, like, I understood it, but I didn't have the understanding I have now as a grown woman.
Absolutely.
I was disgusted because I was just like, I can't believe you went this route after being who you are. For me, it was like, do you know who you are? Like, you don't have to do this. But what had happened was she had did a interview. Anytime she did interviews, even during that time when I was so upset with it, I would watch it. And when that whole situation happened with that podcast, and she did that interview with Vince Russo, and mind you, this was like the first time she had spoke about the breakup, any of it. I had knew about it because she wrote about it. Um, and she sat there and explained it like, hey, I was accustomed to a certain lifestyle. I had these finances, blah, blah, blah. When the company just abruptly let me go like that, I had to do everything I could. She did reality TV show, of course, over time that dries up. It's not like reality TV is not like it is now, where there's seasons and seasons and seasons, and you can go to this show, that show. Then some reality shows were network binding.
And it was
So
also really fresh back then. There were not that many shows out back when she
no,
was on reality TV. I think we there was Surreal Life, Real World,
The Bachelor,
Big
Young
Brother,
Millionaire,
see
things like random stuff.
Survivor, but it wasn't
Yeah,
like what we have today. By
yeah.
no,
It was like random nuances of a show every
hmm
week. But and then plus, like, with some of them being network binding, they, if you worked on, did a reality show on ABC, you couldn't just go over to this place. Like, whereas
absolutely.
now you'll see the same person on six shows at once, and you just be
Hmm
like, how does that work? But she had to do things to survive. Uh, and of course, I mean, over time, she picked up her own substance abuse issues. I mean, a lot of people in the industry did. But I think what it was is just over time, so much stuff happened that she was in survival mode. She had to make these decisions that I feel like even when she got up there, I think she realized she didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
But when she did that interview with Vince Russo and she explained it all, and she was just like, I didn't want to make these choices. I had to. And then when I started to understand it, and I wrote that article and was just like, I get it. I understand. You don't want people to look her up on the internet because what could possibly come up first. And he wasn't lying. There was a point in time when you did put her name in the Google search engine. That was the first thing that came up was that stuff. But it was just like for me, it was just like I don't think he realized that saying that he was taking what she did from her because he was
100%.
so hyper focused on that. And that just for the longest time it threw me off because she was one of the main ones that got me into women's wrestling. Like I did not care what the dudes was doing. I was just like, they do the same thing. Midian's gonna run out here naked. I don't care.
And so many people
Um,
have said that. Yeah.
yeah. And I mean, besides like the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, and very few others, I didn't really care. And even to now, like a lot of women that got into the business, they got into the business because they watched the girls from back in her era. Or if they were into indie wrestling, they watched like your Mercedes Martinez, Sheila Melissa's, and they'd be like, they just look so strong, so opposing. I want to be like them. And so watching this, and it was just like, this is why all these girls come because they're seeing the ones come before it. Like all of those girls came there because Jackie Sato.
Yeah.
They didn't care about how hard they're going to hit each other.
They
They
wanted
didn't
to
care
be
about
like they wanted
anything.
to be like Jackie.
Be
I
like
think too,
Jackie.
even somebody like Dump, who becomes this monster heel, she gets into wrestling because she saw Jackie. It only takes one person, and I think specifically like as it relates to China, is just like it brings up a very real truth of just
Hmm.
those are the consequences of a monopoly.
Yep.
Because when the only game in town, the only show in town, they decided they no longer want you, there is nowhere else to go. It's
Yeah.
not as easy to get up and relocate to like Japan or things like that.
Mm-mm.
Even though like you might try, you might get a few matches, but by then you're making so much money. To be honest, like no, you're not gonna make
You
the
don't want to do it.
make it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those things of, and I think that's why people say like they'll be like, oh well, Mercedes, if she really loved the game, she'll just go there full time. They can't afford her full time, respectfully, and you shouldn't have to like, especially after the boundaries that I feel like China had broke down. You shouldn't
Hmm.
have to negotiate on your price. You shouldn't have to like
No.
go down on
No
your
woman should be doing that. I
no.
I feel like that. I've been feeling like that for about 15 years, maybe even longer. Um, Especially like in my case when I really got into the whole journey of like being involved in women's wrestling, specializing in it and everything. And there would be times when, I used to be like a meme for my profile picture on Twitter,
Mhm.
but only people knew who I looked like is when I went to the show. And some of the girls recognized me, and I'd be like, "Why'd you recognize me? Don't do that. Don't draw attention to me. I'm just here. Don't do that." And there would be some of them that would come in my DMs, and they'd be like, "Hey, I'm trying to work for so so," and I'd be like, "Uh-huh." And we would have those conversations about how when they go negotiate the price, they're trying to lowball them, lower ball than the lower mid card guys on the show. And I'd be like, no.
Mhm.
And a couple of them understood when I said, no, don't do that. You go with your price. What's your price? You go with your price. Some of them could not believe I was saying that. I was just like, no. And I would tell them all the same thing. You start marketing yourself lower, they're always going to look at you as that.
Mhm. And
Don't
it's
do
not
that.
even just wrestlers. I mean, we've had this conversation, I think, when I first started with writing of just like, I
Hmm.
think I asked you, like, how do I go in and negotiate? And like, of saying stuff, especially like now, once you build, especially a portfolio for yourself, and you can say, well, I've been published here, 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 and here. I've been published in print and
Hmm.
digital. No, I'm not. That $25 an article, not for me. Of
Right.
just not saying like once you get to a point, once you build up a name and a portfolio of your for yourself, like the price is the price, and I think
Yeah.
that we forget that, especially in America, women in wrestling have not always had that luxury. And to be honest,
Mm-mm.
it's still a luxury reserved for the very few. Very few women can go into a room and tell a company what their price is. And
Mm-hmm.
you can probably name them all on one hand and maybe not even use all your fingers. And that's
Yeah.
just the
There's
truth of
very
like
few.
the amount of women who actually have negotiating power when they get to the table, when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to money, very small. Even in 2024, and I think of even one last thing on the China thing of just those comments about her lack of being in the Hall of Fame aged so poorly. When you think
Yes.
about the amount of men who are in there who have much worse things at the top of their search result,
Okay.
there is somebody in the Hall of Fame right now who has 34 indictments, 34 indictments, several court cases, geriatric sex pest rapists, you can name whatever,
Yeah.
and they ran for president. So
Yeah. And that's why when I read that article, like now here's the thing. A lot of people don't know this. Um, I was a Triple H fan. Like I don't know what happened, but there was a point when I was like maybe 10 or 11, I became a Triple H fan. I can't remember.
I was a
I don't
DX
know
fan
what
for a
happened.
while.
But see, for me, it wasn't even the DX. It was just I don't know what happened because I was so against Triple H. I think it was we had a carnival, and at the carnival, like you throw darts, you get pictures or whatever. There was this one stand that had like all the wrestling pictures, and me, I was like, I want. It was a big Sable picture. I wanted the Sable picture, and I told my mom, I was like, I'm gonna get that Sable picture. Like I'm damned if I don't, I'm gonna get it. I had China, I had Lita. I was like, I need Sable because for me, even though then I was just like, they are somehow pillars because like Sable, controversial as she may be, I mean, sis was like, I'm suing y'all because y'all are exploiting me in a way I didn't consent to. And then you had China, and that's China, that's when she was like really out here, like everywhere. And then Lita was coming right behind. And I was like, I need Sable. Like, it would just finish it out. And I think I ended up getting a Triple H picture, and I never been so pissed. Um, I was so pissed, guys. Like, y'all have no idea how aggravated I was. I was so mad. I was mad from the carnival. I was mad on the way home. And then I put all my other pictures I had won the whole weekend. Mind you, the whole weekend I had won like the slam dunk of pictures, right? And then here comes him. And I was just so aggravated. My mom's like, why don't you don't have Triple H up there? Well, she used to call him ha ha ha, because the three H's ha ha ha. Why don't you why don't you have ha 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 up there? And I'm like, I don't like him. I don't want him. And I think my cousin was going to trade me. I think he had like viscera or something. He was going to trade me. I was like, I don't want his
You,
white
I was
eyes
about to
glowing
say
in the dark.
you was gonna put Viscera up instead.
And I was like, I'll just settle for Hunter Hemsley. Like, no. So somehow around that time, I started developing a love for Triple H, but I could not stand him. And I was a fan of Triple H. So when he said that about it was just like, Hunter,
Was he in
I
charge of
get it.
NXT by that time?
I think so.
I think you know what though. I do think just because of the quality of the product, I think that at that time compared to what we were seeing on the main roster and the
Mm-hmm.
lack of options elsewhere, I do think that there was a lot of goodwill. He had earned
Mm-hmm.
a lot of goodwill amongst hardcore fans. Because I mean, Black and Gold, like you talked about China, for me, that person was
Mm-hmm.
the Banks. Like I was
Yes.
obsessed of just in high school. I mean, I would go to my job. I didn't have a bank account yet. I would I would take my checks in cash, go to Walmart and buy the 3 month
Uh,
WW Network subscription gift cards, to keep up with NXT. Like I'm talking about, I would buy. Like I said, I have a bank account, so I'd buy these Visa gift cards so I can go on WWE shop and order
I
my
understand. I know the struggle.
t-shirts. And I'm writing my essays for my project talking about some yes and Sasha versus Bailey and what it meant like so I think during that time of NXT Black and Gold, I felt like they could do no wrong. So I do think like a lot of
Yeah.
people, I think there was a lot of goodwill around that time. So don't
Yeah.
feel bad.
I think in overall, I feel like he has an understanding of what he said at that time was possibly wrong. Um,
Yeah.
I think what it was for me during that time that really had me like, for me, I was just like, Hunter, no. Like, we've came a long way. You just had to say that. It was like you were engaged to this woman. You lived with this woman. You traveled with this woman for many years. Like, it was like I get it. You're married. You moved on. Things happen. Terrible things transpired. But it was just like in that moment, it was just like I felt like he just forgot that he was not protecting her vulnerability at
And
all.
honoring her legacy. I think too of just all of us will eventually leave this world and all that will be left
Mhm.
is our impact of just no matter what she did, she could never be boiled down to one thing. Like to ever be
Yes.
like of just the cultural impact of people like Jade, who says like, China's one of her biggest inspirations of so many different people that we see today are
Mhm.
honestly forget that the archetype that we see today, that archetype of the tall, strong,
Statuesque.
what, yeah, but super hyper feminine, but like, these big muscles, the Jades, the Rias, the Charlottes, like this whole, it's a whole archetype of women's wrestling, the North American formula,
Mhm.
like Raquel Rodriguez, especially on the WWE side of just there's a whole formula for these type of women, and that all comes from China.
China. Yeah, because at that time, before her, it was you didn't. I mean, you seen it in territories. You seen like the opposing figure, but she was, especially when she first started, she was so muscular bound that it was different. Like when she ran out there and yanked up Marlena, it was like, who is this? What is going on? Like it was shocking because you did not see a woman have pretty much the height of most of the men in the
Absolutely,
division.
it was the intersection
So
of strength and beauty.
yeah, and you didn't see that often. So it's like when you see that, and then when you look at Joshi, and that's why I always say with people like it's so weird with American fans. I feel like we're so spoiled and we're so subjected to a certain archetype, or we live in a bubble sometimes. In Joshi, the bigger opposing person looking the complete opposite is like a normalized thing.
Absolutely,
Like you couldn't be named Dynamite Kansai and be like 5'2". Like it just doesn't work the same. Like you have to be towering everyone. Like you can't be Aja Kong and be 4'11". Like it
no,
just doesn't translate the same. Cause like these names come with actual power. It's the same with Bulnak. You know, with her name, it's like you expect power. You expect size. You expect her to give you that look of like, oh my god, I should fear her. If she was smaller and statuesque, it wouldn't drive home the same effect.
but I think that goes back to like what we were talking about as far as like coming off that hair versus hair match, right? And that like that kind of like opening up the doors, at least in Japan, for women to not be so beholden to like the
Mm-hmm.
in stereotypes. America never got there. So it's just
No.
like we want you to be strong, but you still need to be able to be on a Playboy cover too. Like we want you
Yes.
to have muscles. I think Rhea's a great example right now of just
Mm-hmm.
like yes, we like to look at you, but like you need to be the symbol. You need to be this
Mm-hmm.
sex symbol of just like there's no you can't have one without the other of just they very much so go hand in hand. And I think that Japan, like like we talk about like the shrimp, Dynamite Kansai, Aja Kong, they not on the Playboy covers.
No. And I
And
would
it's
be,
okay.
honestly, I would even be shocked if they did because, even when it's funny because, like, I don't know if you see these tweets every once in a while, but like, you'll see like Joshis do like their own like book where they're in their lingerie and stuff and it
Yes.
pops up on the
Hmm.
timeline. And then you have like those 3 or 4 fans that are like, oh my God, they're sexualizing them. And I'm like, no, if you go back into the lore, this has always been a part of the culture, especially if it's a pretty girl. Like, it makes me think about to Takako Inoue and Cutie Suzuki, who was like out here acting and being just daggone cute. Like, they were posing in these albums and stuff like that because one, they were playing off their looks. That's why them two had that rivalry of like who was the baddest one here. So it's like when I see that, it's like this is a normalized thing. But even with the heels, you didn't see the heels do that.
Hmm.
Um, Nowadays, I would not be shocked if any of the heels approached that, mainly because
Yeah.
how things have changed um, with the women in the business. Um, like, for instance, Rhea aesthetically is a beautiful girl,
Hmm.
with and without the makeup. And then her body, like I always say to people, like if she had a different body shape, I just would feel like it didn't fit her, because like she just her
She
whole
was made to
aesthetic,
be strong. Like
she was made to be strong.
she was made to be strong. Like Rhea is like probably the modern embodiment of like the China body of just like
Yes,
this and absolutely of just stunning.
like she's chiseled to perfection.
Hmm.
And if she had a different body shape, I just like, this is not you, but we gonna accept it. With Rhea, even when she had the blonde hair, we seen it on timeline. We see so many different forms of sexualization towards women all the time. And with her, just her aesthetic, it had people like, oh my God, she's attractive.
Hmm.
Like, she's really attractive. And I think that also led into even more the lore that we see around her, that they portray her as attractive.
Hmm.
Because years ago, especially even with the Divas division, almost everybody was attractive.
Absolutely.
So there was no one you could sit there and be like, she's really pretty. They're all pretty. Like, there was never a one where you'd be like, she looks really pretty tonight. Like, you couldn't do that because they all presented that like archetype. We're pretty. We're here, and it was nothing against them. That was just what they were hiring
That
then.
was the
Whereas
presentation.
now, yeah, as whereas now they hire people that look completely different from each other.
Hmm.
So people becoming attractive to them is actually a natural thing and not a forced, you're already attracted to them.
Absolutely.
So with Rhea, it worked out in her favor, and I feel like that happens with a lot of girls, and I feel like it's the same. I mean, we see it in Japanese culture sometimes, but we don't see it as much because I think fans kind of have that respect to not sexualize them.
It's
Whereas in
like
American culture, we just go straight into it.
I think it's interesting though too because it's people like I think Mina Shirakawa is a very interesting person here because like
Yes.
in Japanese wrestling, like Mina was often seen as just a model, just a pretty face, like and like honestly, in Stardom, she was one of the weaker wrestlers for a very, very, very long time until her jaw got shattered by Saya Kamatani, and she came back like
Yeah.
the second coming of Tanahashi or something. But then she comes to America, and it's just we want Mina, we want Mina, we want Mina, we want
I
Mina.
know, and it's like,
I
what?
went to when I went to Chicago earlier this year for a Windy City Riot, and they
Mm-hmm.
meet and greet the night before. And I was standing in line with my friend, and I kid you not, like all these wrestlers, like they got their line set up. Meters? I'm talking about almost out the door.
I can imagine.
Of just and like Azumi was there. Don't get me wrong, she had a really sizable line. Like
Mm-hmm.
like she had a really sizable line, and like like they got. Well, I think Shota and Minoru Suzuki they were doing it in like another room, and so everybody got comfortable lines. But Mina
Right.
coming to America, she did that. Oh my god! And she was on the pre-show, and
Yeah,
but
she.
it just her. I think her aesthetic just fits so much better here, at least for what American wrestling fans are typically looking for, unfortunately. Don't
Mhm.
get me wrong, if you actually watch her wrestle, she's a very great talent. And I think like she has improved considerably over the last few years.
Yes.
But yeah, I think it's very evident, like when you see like her specifically, she's one of those people where of just like her looks are definitely, I think, what people see first, at least on like the American side. But I think her
Mhm.
looks were a hindrance in Japanese wrestling in a way, which I think is such a fascinating
It
balance.
is.
Right? Yeah,
It's the same with the American side. Like, in the Indies, you know, you had your women's promotions that are pretty much like non-existent now.
yeah,
You had your Shimmer, you had your WSU. Shine still puts out shows, but we never see any advertisements for it. I wish they would fix that, please. Um, you had your Queens of Combat. You had your West Coast Pros and stuff like that, and you had your Sabotage. You had your ACWs. You had your Girls' Night Outs. Your pretty much every part of the United States had some type of women's promotion, women's situation in the promotion. It was pretty much like when I really sat down and wrote it down, like if I was to map it out on a map, it would look like the territories.
yeah,
Legit. Um, and you would see when, especially when WWE did that whole purge of the indies, the Brit Rest community, um, and you would see those women here from North America, Brit Rest, get signed. There's a lot of fans that are still in tune to that weird mindset that society has taught them. The first thing they would say is, well, they're not attractive to
yeah.
be on TV. And it's weird because, like, these will be talented women, like, just straight up and down, just super talented. She's not that cute. And it's just weird because it's like, you have to find them attractive to actually be invested. It's like the weirdest dichotomy that they look at it that way. And then if you go anywhere else, it's more about the wrestling than the attraction. It's a weird. I don't know how that's balanced. And in Japan, it's even more weird because especially when you have the idol culture. And I remember when Stardom first started, that used to be the issue with a lot of fans that when they were pushing Yuzuki Akawa, because she was the big idol at the time, a lot of old school Joshi fans were just like, "Get her away from me."
Enough.
Like I get it.
They do not
Like
play.
I
They
get
do
it.
not play at all. They do not play. I
They
agree. I
they
think
were
that.
like, I get it. She's cute. She's pretty. But get her away from me.
Yeah, I agree.
It's
Because
different.
though it's been such a, it's so different. And I think about like for me, I didn't really get into women's wrestling specifically until I started watching TNA. So that was like a
Hmm.
full year almost after I started watching wrestling. And don't get me wrong, like I liked Lita, I liked Mickey James, but by the time I started watching wrestling, these women had started to get like phased out on their way towards retirement or whatever.
Yep.
And so, but I remember watching TNA and I remember just seeing Awesome Kong and I'm just like, oh my God,
Like the
what
supposed
is
black woman.
of just like not even like who is she? What is she? Like she is completely different than anything I've ever seen before. Of just
Hmm.
and I think of even like the women that they were having coming on, they all looked so different. Yeah, you had the beautiful people. Yeah, you had Gail Kim, who was a diva at some point, but you
Hmm.
also had the Awesome Cons. You had ODB. You had um Hamada. You had Hamada in there. Like you had these people, and they all looked so different. Even Victoria, when she eventually comes over and becomes Tara, she's
Yeah.
presented completely different from like how I had seen her in WWE, and
Yep.
so it's just like, oh, like it's just like, oh, this is different. Like here, we're focusing on what's happening in the ring. Like it's not diva search. We not doing bikini matches. We not doing
Hmm.
evening gown matches. We
It's
doing
a different world.
it's a whole different world. And I think like closing the loop, going back to like the original topic of discussion here, Queen of Villains versus American Wrestling. It's I really enjoyed seeing. where a lot of these things are rooted in, of like a lot of the behaviors. And that, like, I think
Mm,
that is one thing that I really took from the series overall is it was nice to kind of like see where a lot of these behavior patterns started, like these behavior
yes.
patterns of wrestling fans, of wrestling cultures, of wrestling executives, of like how wrestling, women's wrestling is marketed, what's seen as, you know, palatable, what's not seen as palatable, what's seen as far, what's
Mm,
not too far. I think that as a microcosm, like I said, a lot is not covered, a lot is not covered,
no.
but the things that are covered, I think that they did a really good job painting that picture of like how we got here, essentially, of how and why women are judged so harshly, why women have to fight for so many things. But it also shows you where women have been too. I think of where women have been, of
Mm,
all the things that, you know, have been overcome, and succeeding in the midst of all these challenges. I think overall it really is a story of hope. And I think it's also nice that Dump isn't dead. So like, you know, to like
yeah, okay.
this is a rare wrestling story where that doesn't
Because we
end
always have
death.
them after they're dead, or
Yeah.
like, because like that was one thing that stood out in my mind. I'm like, I'm so glad that they're doing this while she's still moving around physically,
But all of them are
and
alive, you know?
like
Linus
all of
Austin,
them.
Medusa, Jaguar, and some of the, and I think what's such a blessing, I think too, to like to watch, because you see how they broke the mold of just we start off the series, you know, by the second, third episode, we at that, you know, the 25-year limit, and most of these women are still active wrestlers today. They
Yeah,
still in there. Are they at their best? You know, but they still in
I
there.
mean they do their thing,
They do their
but
thing.
but I also it's like with the 25-year limit, it was like at some point it had to be changed. Like when we seen in the series when Jackie Sato announced that she was opening up JWP, and I wrote about that, months back about how that happened, and then it branched off to LLPWX. When they broke up the real wrestlers and the shooters and separated and just created a whole diatribe of more promotions.
Mhm.
And the one thing she wanted to be gone when she launched it was that 25-year-old rule. She
That's
wanted
it.
that done. And what it was at that time, she was aged out. She hadn't even gotten to her prime. And she was watching her other peers go through the same thing of like being forced out of wrestling. And then at that time, I think some newer Joshi fans, like, they now watch Joshi, they're like, oh my god, there's Wave, there's this, there's that. Like, they don't really have an understanding that at one point there was just one. Then she made it two. Then two became three. Then it became four. And then it started rolling down when other Joshis branched off and started making their own promotions. And for some reason, Rozzy was involved in all of them. Girl, that was a choice. But, you know,
But it also shows you how women got empowered over time, because
yes.
there used to
And
be a time, even if you weren't, even if you were a woman doing women's wrestling, there was no such thing as a promotion without a male backing you.
and that's true. And she wanted that 25-year-old rule gone because she was not ready to retire. She wasn't done wrestling. She felt like she had more to give. And then over the years, you started seeing like Jaguar Yokota when she is aged out of the promotion, is over there. You start seeing other women that were aged out prematurely jump over there. And then eventually, I think AJW at some point they kept that rule. Um, and I think eventually they got rid of it. And I think around the time they did get rid of it is when it was getting ready to go out of business.
Mhm.
Because at that point, there was, RZN, you had Pro Wrestling Wave, you had Oz Academy, which was just kind of like a small group growing around now becoming a thing. You had Gaia. You had so many other promotions forming, and so many of these wrestlers breaking off and forming their own promotions that they had to change some things to kind of salvage what they had. But by that point, everybody was gone, you
Yeah.
know. But it really was a detriment because what happened was when JWP was formed, um, you started seeing a lot of these wrestlers that were phased out 2, 3 years prior appear, and it's just like, I wish that wasn't the thing
What I
because we were cheated at some point. Like these women were cheated out of a longer career. But if they kept that intact even to today, I mean, I don't think we would have Kana. I don't think we would have Io Shirai. I don't think we would have any of these women. These women would be considered like a backstory to another backstory.
Mhm.
So that rule had to go. And I mean, now, I mean, Yokota's like what, 63, 64?
Absolutely.
And she's,
Yeah.
and
I
Kong
mean,
has got to be near that age.
look at like the current women of just Mina Shirakawa is 36 and about to probably get the is on
Hmm.
the biggest platform of her career. You know, of the biggest platform of her career of like
Hmm.
people like Mayu is what 32 after being the
Yeah.
icon and literally carrying a promotion so long of just like and look at like I mean Io, who the career that she's had. You know, these people are in their
Yes.
30s, like of just being a woman's wrestler, getting to your 30s is still it, you know, that's not that wasn't always a thing. And I even
Hmm.
too of just being able to, you know, be able to reform yourself of like I remember doing some reading of after like, you know, watching the series and like looking into Gaia and all these places of seeing how like, you know, Lioness Oscar, you know, she becomes a mega heel. She goes to these different
Yep.
promotions and they become heels. Crush gals become heels. They start doing different things and like because they now have the ability and the space to be different, you know, and I think like
Yep.
because that's what men do, you know, go to
Yeah.
territory to territory. You know, you tweak your character a little bit depending on where you are, and then you know you go and you refresh your territory. I mean, you refresh your character, but women haven't always had that luxury, and so like
No.
it's really cool. I would say like watching this from beginning to end and seeing how they literally changed history. Like this group of women, I
Hmm.
say from Beauty Pair all the way down to like Bull Nakano, so much of what we see today in wrestling is made possible by this, you know, about this 10-year to 12-year stretch of women. Even, you know, in the midst of Dave Meltzer, all he talk about is 90s, you know, all Japan. But that's all
I
made
want
possible.
him to move on.
I need him. I need him to watch something else. Just anything else. I need you to watch something else and stop giving my these matches 4.75s.
I don't get. He is a he's a can of soda that we will crack another time, but he is the epitome of a dinosaur journalist, and I hate saying it. And the funny thing
We have
is
several.
anytime I respond or say his name, for whatever reason, this man responds to me, and I'm like, you knew it's been beef for years with me and you just never respond to me correctly. I remember being on a Observer Live one time, and they were like, Dave's coming on, and I hung up. I hung up, and I was on there. I guess they were trying to introduce us. I was like, I'm not speaking to that man because I was so done with him. Um, what's always bugged me with him is like I appreciate that he and a few other journalists got to go watch that during the golden era. I love that they had that experience. What bothers me with him is that in some way, even in his writing, and some of his newer fans and fans that are not really up with him, he writes when it comes to women in a certain manner that always bothers me. And it's always the, well, that was good, but it could have been better. But I'm not going to actually say it like this. I'm going to say it with these cute words to not make you think I'm being this way or
It's
coming off
dogless
misogynistic.
language. Yeah, dogless
And
language.
he also does the comparison thing, but he tries to act like he doesn't compare them. But then when it comes to the Japanese sides, I think it was like maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I think it was like EO had a match or something. It was a banger of a match, right?
Mhm.
And I'm like, one of my friends sent it to me. It was like, look at this clip from Meltzer. And he's like comparing it to some match that happened in 1988. And I got so pissed off because it was just like, I get it. If you were comparing this to say, like, this is the difference from then to now, understandable. But you cannot sit there and say, well, this is a great match, but it doesn't have Manami Toyota. You can't, like, it's to me, it's always unfair to compare anyone new to someone from 30 years ago. I get it. That was a hate era. But it's like, it's an unfair comparison because you're not giving that person a chance. You're putting them at a standard or telling them they're lesser than
It's a
already.
different era. It's a different era. It's different styles. It's
Hmm.
just like, guess what? Will Ospreay is never going to be Masawa, and that's okay. Kenny Omega is
We
never going
don't want
to
him to be.
be Kobashi, and that's okay. And
Yeah,
I
we
think
don't
that,
want him to be.
like he's grasped that for the men, but for some reason can't wrap his head around that for the women. But what I also think comes out of this of just like what coming from watching this, it shows the need. Like we need more wrestling historians. I do think like part of the problem is because he is kind of almost in a league of his own right now. Of just
Hmm.
there are very few true wrestling historians, especially who encompass more than one territory, one geographic region. Now coverage of some of these regions might be hit or miss, but
Hmm.
he's one of the only people who have even attempted, who have even tried. And so like
Right.
stuff like this of like looking at this project Queen of Villains of, huh, is this what we can accomplish if we actually like invest time, research, and resources towards telling women's stories?
Hmm.
Just like I think for me personally, I'm past the point of just like complaining of just like I think I walked away from this project so inspired of just like how do we get more of this? How do we tell more stories like this? And like even like seeing like some people releasing. I've been watching a lot of the Kim Justice video essays and like they're
I think in that shout out.
YouTube. Yeah. So I watched the one about Dump and Chigusa and like about the real story of how it happened.
Hmm.
We need more people to tell these things. Of just some
Hmm.
people believe that it all started with Stardom, and that's just simply not
No,
true.
there,
That's not true.
like with when I first got in, there was a lot of his story, especially with Joshi. Um, that's kind of like how I learned a lot of things. There used to be sites, and the funny thing is, the sites are no longer here, but I still have them bookmarked as just memories. Um, and there was this one site, I don't know who came up with it, who contributed to it, but they had literally outlined Joshi from like the 1970s all the way up at that point to 2013. And they had just information about like backstage fights, what controversy happened, who didn't sign a contract, who walked out, like all this stuff. So like basically the tea, they had the tea. And I remember being like, how do you know this? And how do you this person had this in order, and it was so amazing, especially when you get to the 2000s with which I call the defunct era, because so many promotions went defunct, everybody was just everywhere, nothing made sense. And it was just so much information from just that time period alone that I honestly feel like to this day I haven't seen anybody else come with,
Mm,
anybody else research or even have that in-depth information. And I think what it is because like you said, historians, they exist, but it's become a lost art because nowadays, I always say it every once in a while on Twitter, reading comprehension is important. Comprehension is important overall.
absolutely.
People don't want to read. People just want everything in front of them immediately. But it's like you have to read to gather information. That's how you
Absolutely.
gather information. And people don't want to do that. So it's like, I think over time, those people that were chronicalizing things, um, there was people that would put shows in order of match cards and stuff. I think those people just got fed up. Like, what is that one site? Pro Wrestling Database still exists,
Mhm.
um, which shocks me because
I
that
used to
has
be on
everything.
online world of wrestling. That
World of
was my
Wrestling,
mm-hmm.
and that's still out here. And I mean, cage matches always existed, but not many people utilized it at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now everybody's like, got a cage match, and I'm like, that's your only source you're gonna
You
go
guys have
to?
ruined Cage Match, by the way. I want y'all to know that. Y'all
Okay.
have ruined the tour. Um, I will say though, I think too of like the old school wrestling sites. I've realized with the real history, they ain't got no pictures on it for real. It's just basic HTML. It don't look fancy, but I
Yes.
guarantee you, they got the facts. They have
Yes.
the facts. Them old timey sites that don't got all the fancy pictures and
And
the
that's the ones that have it.
Just and I've seen some fans, and I think some fans like circulate a lot of stuff on Twitter, or but I think that there's some people who are genuinely they're fans who are doing it for the love of the game.
Hmm.
They're not journalists, but if we can get day energy into the journalists, I think that we would be in a lot better shape. Which I think is a great segue to the final point, final question I have for you. So like I said, I think that the biggest takeaway for me from this is that I want to watch more wrestling. I want to learn more, and I think that watching this series back with even more context, I think made it even more better for me. And so like, is there who is a woman who is in this series who you think may not have been super featured, or or somebody from this era who may not have been included, that you think people who watch Queen of Villains should go back and look into, or like they should research their stuff?
For me, I would definitely say, with my own bias, Devil Masami.
Hmm.
Um, and for me, it's because, again, my own bias. But I just feel like with Devil Masami, like Jaguar Yokota, we see her every time. We see sis. We know sis is out here. I would even say her, but Devil Masami, I feel like with her as a person, even when I did that article on her years ago, trying to get research on her, there's such a mystery with her.
Hmm.
Um, and then how she worked matches, how she was just so opposing that it was just like you have to, like, even if I always tell people, you can always watch a Japanese match and know who's the heel and who's the face immediately.
Hmm.
And she made it so clear that she was the bad guy. No one else is, and no one's going to outdo her. I would definitely implore a lot of people to dive into Devil Masami because, I mean, that woman continued wrestling. I want to say it was like 30 years or something like that. She didn't retire to 2008. And everything I've seen of hers, even when she's gotten up into her age, because there's not many people that can wrestle for 30 years and still be as good in the ring. Even in her older years, um, there was a match she had. I want to say it was Mayumi Ozaki. She was doing a power bomb on her. She was doing the whole power bomb, pick her back up, power bomb again, and it was just like anytime I see that match, I'm just always with power bombs. Everybody can do them wrong, but the way she was just snapping and doing it, snapping and doing it, just like the pace with the motion. And at that time, I didn't realize watching that match that was literally like her 30th anniversary. And I'm like, she's got this pace at 30 years in. That's fucking impressive. And her timing, it was just so there. Whereas, yeah, I mean, some people up in their 30 years, you can see the timing is a little off. But with her, she was just so ready for anything. And I would definitely implore anybody to look at her. Um, I wish there was more stuff with Crane U, but we didn't have much with her.
Yeah,
Um, Even her decision to go and become a referee, that was interesting. But
I think that the
she
tag match might be on YouTube though.
that might be.
The Crush Gals versus Dump and Crane U. I think that
I
that
think that is.
yes, and so I think that that one's definitely. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's the highest rated. That's the highest rated Crush Gals match on Cage Match. If I'm not mistaken, from when I looked
Possibly is.
there, I would say Jaguar. But
Mhm.
and I think it's just because I think that there are wrestlers who are like acknowledged as the goats, but I think like there are a lot of wrestlers who are probably your wrestlers' favorite wrestlers and like influence. And when we come to like
Yep.
influence, I think of like very similar to kind of like Kenta and Marufuji and the influence that they had on the America in like the 2000s of stuff like that. Of
Mhm.
genuinely like an architect, somebody who like changed the way that we
Mhm.
like the actual wrestling part of wrestling, changed the way that we go about it. I think Jaguar Yokota is just easily, and I think also too like one of those. real world beaters who can say that they went from territory to territory and was able to get like some type of success and really laid the groundwork
Yeah.
for people like Bull and Akira Hokuto to be able to do things like that. Yeah, I would go with Jaguar. Obviously, she's
Hmm.
featured here, but
Yep.
still nowhere near as like they still weren't even able to encompass how big of a deal that she was, and also her long term impact on the business. Of
That too, because
absolutely,
they really, I mean, they in the series they kind of just like when Jackie pretty much like retired, but she hadn't retired yet. When they kind of phased her out, um, they went with Jaguar. You know, at the time she was Miki Yokota. She
Mhm.
was, babyface. They imposed her as the big deal, but they didn't really encompass and explain like how she is the big one. Like what makes her the big babyface? What makes her the one right now? And you didn't realize for a moment in that series, you didn't realize she was the big deal until when she went to Mexico.
Absolutely.
And that was like the one part where I was just like, I wonder what made them just go straight into that. Like, what was the ins and outs of that? But it was just more so like, hey, Jackie's going, we're aging her out, it's you. And I
Yeah.
think that's how they did a lot of things back then. It was just, hey, she's 25, you're here.
I think Jackie's also an interesting person for people to explore too, especially her career JWP on of just
Mm-hmm.
like a how big of a deal it was for her to start a promotion at that time. Like I think obviously they touch on it, but all we really kind of see is like she starts the promotion and then like that's it. Like
That's
we
it.
don't see her again.
Nothing else.
We don't really see like the big flesh out, and like I think I would say also too, and I've even tasked myself with this to check out more work from those promotions like the JWP Gaia, the things that came out of that,
Mm-hmm.
and of just there's so much like there's
There's a lot.
and it was all made possible by this era. Even if you look at the '90s stuff, from All Japan, like All Japan Women, I remember watching, and even what I really enjoyed it too is watching the as I'm making my way through some of these tapes of when they started cross promoting the All
Yes.
Japan women in the J versus JWP matches, which you would think it would never happen. Obviously, when it seemed like the extreme heat that you see in the show, but
Mm-hmm.
when you watch this and you're just like, oh, like they eventually start working together, and it just shows you that time is a circle. The Forbidden Door is not new. Companies
Right.
working together and doing things together. Big Egg Universe.
Which
That's
is like one of my favorite.
that's how they packed out the Tokyo Dome off women's
Which
wrestling.
is,
All these organizations getting together.
and that's like, I remember saying some years back, like, every once in a while I rewatch Big Egg Universe, doesn't matter which one it is. And what it is for me, the reason why I rewatch it is because they packed those buildings for women's wrestling.
Absolutely.
And everybody in that crowd was not just there to see one person. They were there to see several people. Because you can't tell me at that time that none of these people were not attending other shows. Like, if you was into women's wrestling and you followed one of these stars into another promotion, of course you were watching LLPWX. Of course you was watching JWP. Of course you was watching Gaia and anybody else that had a small group that was buzzing at that time. Like, of course you were. And seeing them all come together, years back, they probably would never have done that. So it's
Absolutely.
like on the American side, we always have that forbidden door, which I hate that saying. That and buried needs to go to hell, like in a handbasket. Because it's like on the American side, we were so conditioned to see WCW and WWE as two separate entities, not realizing they had the same thing in common: television, TV, wrestling. Same thing in common. We could not see them in the same realm because we were taught not to. Even when we had the invasion angle, and that was all because one brought the other, you know.
Absolutely.
So when we do see these other things, or we see someone leave AEW, go to WWE, or vice versa, or this person leave TNA and go to one or the other. We throw out the forbidden door, or like now we see TNA working with WWE. But for me, when I see the timeline freak out about that, I'm like, I feel like this has been a relationship that's been there since 2007, but we just didn't know about it. Like, there's always, in some way, somehow, promotions work with each other. It's just that here on the American side, they're just not in the forefront with it.
Hmm.
They have to always make it distinctive that this is us, that's
Yeah,
them.
I
But
think
in
also.
Japan, they're always like, let's come together. It's a benefit. So and so's retiring. Everybody come together. It's totally
Absolutely.
different.
They don't play by that in Japan. Too, if like for your retirement show, it's almost like your
Oh,
birthday. You can
everybody
get
coming. It's a
whatever
cookout.
you want. You can get whatever you want. But I think that that was also the cool thing too of just like you learn more. History can inform your reality. Like you don't become
Mm-hmm.
so like shaken by the things that are happening, like on the day to day, like in modern times when you see stuff like that of just that's how women wrestling grows when people work together. That's how women
Yes.
wrestling goes forward when people work together. That's just how wrestling period goes forward. Like
Mm-hmm.
even New Japan and All Japan during their dark time, they were doing Tokyo Dome shows together. They were
Yeah.
doing Tokyo Dome shows together, like and yeah, eventually, like they're doing collaborations with FMW, even though that wasn't their style of for
It's
wrestling
talent.
to
Mm-hmm.
for wrestling to sustain itself. Collaboration has to be,
It has to
at the
be. It has to be. It's the same with back when Shimmer, when they would bring in international talent or even their home base talent, and they started to work in relationship with Femme Fatales. And then
front.
Shine is already their sister promotion, so they already had that working relationship. And they would bring Femme Fatales in, and then later WSU, um, they would exchange talent. If they had international talent in, they would interchange them. Like, hey, have them work your show. Will take this person trade off. Like, they had that going for a while, and it was really good because you would see like Ayaka Hamada go against like Lufisto, or you know random matches that you would just think in your head, but you would never think would happen, and it made a lot of good shows. And with that, you had a lot of fans that watched all the products. Even during that time, it was a lot of DVD collecting. You had a lot of people watching, so it would translate over. But it's like nowadays, you have some promotions that do that with each other, but you still have a lot of them that are still in that mindset of like, no, mine is mine. And
Correct.
that killed the indies before the talent swooping. No one wanted to be friends with each other. And it's just like, I don't think a lot of people realize that makes it healthy. It makes it entertaining. And it actually gets people that didn't know you to tune into your product.
Yeah, I think even like a good example is kind of like earlier this year in Ring of Honor when Athena got to defend the title against Sheeta of just, the first time that they locked horns was in Shimmer. Of like,
Yep.
bringing in that Japanese talent, like it made such a, those are the types of things that happen when you just foster collaboration. And I just
Yeah.
think that that's important. And speaking of collaboration, I've said my closing point 5 times, but this is actually my closing point. This is reminds me of just how like when we looked at like the evolution of women's wrestling like through just from this small snippet from like the 80s for all Japan women's of just it just hit me like this is going to be the first time in a very long time like this first week of January women will be wrestling in both the Budokan and the Tokyo Dome singles
That's
matches.
insane.
Crazy for two
Hmm.
different promotions for both Noah and for New Japan. Oh well, I mean, well, Wrestle Dynasty, like that's of just like it.
That's
It's
insane.
crazy to think about. Of just we're going to see
And
women in the Budokan and the Tokyo Dome.
and that wasn't a thing. I
Mm-mm,
mean, you would see them in either or, but not both.
nope. And so like I think like that's a great silver lining.
Hmm.
Of just we're making progress, and but also too of thinking about how women are getting on the cart. Collaboration. Wrestle Dynasty is 5 different organizations put together. I'm interested to
Which is
see
insane.
I'm interested to see what the numbers look like. I'm also very, very, very sad that I'm not going to be in attendance. Like, and actually, if somebody can gift me with the lottery, or if anybody has like $2,000 laying around for me to get a flight to Tokyo,
Just you're not using it, just hand it
just,
here.
just if you're not
Just hand
using
it
that,
here.
I'm so
You're not gonna
sad.
use it.
I think I'm so sad because it's just like y'all would pick the year that you know I'm not going to put
Mm-hmm.
y'all put the women in the dome. Y'all got all my faves in the dome. It's just I went last year and it was amazing. I plan to go next year because I'm not 2026 because of Tanahashi's retirement, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just so fake. I just think that that's so fake. But no, seriously, like congratulations to all the women who will be it. I don't know how. I don't know how, but I have a dream. And my
Mm-hmm.
dream is I need Sorry to drop that Marigold belt between now and January 5th because I just feel like she needs to be in the Tokyo Dome. I don't know. Like I just feel like out
She
of
might.
what she's done for the scene, she needs to be in the Tokyo Dome. I don't know, y'all. I just that's my dream. And so
Hopefully she does. And sorry, it's. I feel like I've been watching this woman grow up.
mhm.
Oh, I remember when she debuted in Diana, little teeny girl, and it was just like, oh my god. And I just remember just being like, I feel like she's gonna be the one that's gonna be around. And look, like,
She has that old school joshi
mhm,
feeling to her. And I think also too watching this and then like watching a lot of the old school matches of just
mhm,
you have some people who embody bits and pieces of different elements. But she's one of those people that I feel like you could put her in almost every era
mhm.
and she would find a way to succeed.
Yes, she
She's just a
definitely has that.
she's just a classic talent. Like even and when we talk about like the pageantry of just like from her gears, her coats, like her entrances, like she feels like regal in that sense of like, of the Joshi of old. And
Yep.
that's why I need her specifically. I need her in the dome.
Her.
I need her in the dome.
You never know. You might get your
I
wish.
need her, or maybe they'll put her in the Budokan because, like Mari Gold Connection, she'll challenge for that GHC Women's Championship.
That is true.
Who knows? Either way, I need her in front of everybody.
Mhm.
She's one of my
She's worth
personal
it.
favorites, and I think she's the rest. She's my personal wrestler of the year.
Mhm.
But we've yapped for almost 3 hours.
Yes, we have.
Some about Queen of Villains, some not. But no, this
But
has
I
been
mean, I feel like it ties together.
no, it
You
absolutely
know.
does. It absolutely does. And I think just a very conversation about like, women's wrestling, women in wrestling, how far
Mhm.
we've come, how far we still have yet to go. But I'm so grateful. Thank you for one night
One
only
night. One night.
suspension for retirement. Guys, she done told you once. Please don't make her have to tell you again. She is retired. But not for me. Y'all be easy.
Yes.
But
Nope.
I really appreciate this conversation. I always learn so much, seriously, especially when I first got started. Like, Sierra's been a resource for me and like somebody that like I personally go to whenever I need advice, whether it's about writing, whether it's about history or something like that.
Y'all make me so sad when y'all say that.
It's not, I mean, it's not too many people I respect their opinion at this point. Of
Yeah.
just like y'all are not
Oh,
that
okay,
bright.
because you can't.
You can't. You cannot. But no, this has been great. And like I seriously, I know I'm not just saying this of just because I typically I don't review like stuff sometimes. Like
Mhm.
all the time I review stuff
Oh.
is like actual part pop culture, but like this project really resonated with me in such a big
Mhm.
way. And just like it came out over a month ago and like it was still so pertinent to me of just like I knew I wanted to talk about it. And like I remember
Mhm.
when they first dropped the teaser, I think I DM'd you and I was just like, hey, when this come
Yes,
out,
you
don't
did.
forget about me. Hey, we gonna talk. We gonna watch it, and we're gonna talk
Mhm.
about it. And I'm so glad. I'm glad this project exists. Like, shout out to everybody who worked on it. Like Netflix, y'all do a lot of dumb shit
Y'all
with
did
some of
good
these,
with this.
but y'all ate this one thing. Y'all ate this one. Y'all ate this.
Yes. And if y'all come out with more, I have ideas.
Yes, well, I have a list of things for y'all to do
I
for
have
both the
ideas.
men's, the women's. I have ideas for all of it. So many, and but truly, as a lover of wrestling history, and I think this is such a good project, and I hope that you took away from it what I take away from it.
Mhm.
To love wrestling harder and like to watch more of it and ingest more of it. Well, you're a type. Do you have anything you want to plug?
Well, I'm retired. You can find me at Saya My Name on Twitter. It's SEIYA My Name at Twitter.com. Um, I'm retired again. I'll say that one more time. I took for me it reminded me of why I got into women's wrestling, joshi. It just reinvigorated that in my mind of like this is why I got into that. And the crazy thing was, uh, prior to this, it was one night I was in spaces late at night, don't know why, and we were having a whole conversation. Well, they were having a conversation about wrestling, and someone brought up something about Joshi, and they said something that was incorrect, and I just went on this whole diatribe of explaining the whole thing, and they were just like, "And you're retired," and I was like, "Yes, but I had to correct you." And when I was watching it, I was just like, "That's why I got into this." Because I got so tired of people misspeaking about things and wanted things to be in power, be correct, the way it should be. And if anything, it's made me go back down my rabbit hole. Um, and you remember I told you I did notes, right?
Mhm.
Um, Girl, if you could see these notes, I done went down a whole nother rabbit hole and found other mysteries
I
that I'm
believe it though. I
uncovering.
believe when you said you wrote notes, I said, "Oh, I believe her." I said, I believe her." But also too of just you wrote an article. I think you mentioned it a couple months ago. I think that
Hmm.
was, and I think people if she's retired, but it's already out there, so you should read that. It talks about I think
Hmm.
the evolution of like JWP and like what organizations like branched out of
Hmm.
that. So like I think too of just there's a lot of writers who have left this space, but I
Yep.
do think that their work still exists, and I think that especially from a historical perspective, kind of like this
Hmm.
project, it still holds up to this day. And so like I implore any of you who are listening to go ahead and like look into some of those things of
Yeah.
just
Um, anytime I see like Leslie postings, Leslie has been a black creator in the space with Joshi for a long time. Um, a lot of his, especially his early writing, made me like really want to dive into it. Because he spoke in a manner of like, you get those historians that speak in, well, this is what happened on 1973 in a fall night with the snow and everything. He spoke in a manner of like, this happened right now. Like, he would paint the picture. And so he really influenced my writing with Joshi because he wanted to paint the picture of like, this is happening right now, like right in front of you. You got to tell the story. Anytime I see him put up anything, which is every blue moon, because he's kind of taken that step back too, I repost it. Um, Anybody I see that I know is credible and I feel I repost it. And I repost it because they're credible writers. They know what they're talking about, and they're not going to just post anything.
absolutely.
They have credibility. So I always repost that. And with that article, I was covering LLPWX show, and what it was with LLPWX, which is a long acronym. Girl, what was y'all thinking? Um, I wanted people to understand how this even happened because when you watch Big Ed Universe or any show where they have like the promotions come together, they're like the small group at the very end, and you're always like, who are they? How
Mhm.
did they get here? And people never had an understanding of how this promotion came to be. So I had to go and explain like this is actually a branch off of JWP. This is how it happened. And if it wasn't for Kandori, it would have just been one big merger. But thankfully, Kandori, socked Sato in the eye, and we had other promotions pop up.
Mhm.
So I had to explain that, and even with doing that research and going down that rabbit hole with LLPW, it was just like I got reminded of so many women that got so lost in the shuffle, like Iko Sawai, who was like one of my all-time favorites. Um, and just there's just so many women within Joshi that I always tell people you can never get enough. Like
No.
there's always somebody else that's just as captivating. That you're always like, she looks so cool. Let me look her up. Like you just always going to love that. But I'll definitely repost a link to that article. I've been finishing up other articles. I've been trying to work on like deep dives.
Yeah.
recently. So I'll definitely post that stuff up. But again, I'm retired.
And I will be reposting all of those. Yes, I will be reposting all of those. And no, but seriously, I really am really grateful that you did this.
Hmm.
People need to
No
hear
problem.
people who know what they talk about. I don't know. It's just, and I don't even think that I be knowing what I be talking about half the time. But I like to
You
surround
do.
myself with smarter people. And also, y'all, you want to know why I be knowing what I be talking about? Because I have shame. I'm so ashamed. I done seen the way that I
Yes.
be getting people and just be like, "Didn't you say this?" That's why you gotta make. I try to
Okay.
when I write. I think that's why sometimes it takes so long for things to come out. I want it to be correct.
That's how I
I want
am.
it to be correct.
Especially when I got into like the American women's wrestling, I knew that back of my hand. It
Yeah,
was easy. Um, but when it got to the Joshi part, I was so stickler. Like I've got to be correct. I've got to spell this correctly. I got to make sure I'm right. Like when I would do the ring bells roundup, it would take me forever to finish just the Joshi side because I wanted to make sure I was correct. Because back then I didn't have to. I mean, I got stalked on social media and stuff like everybody else does, trolled and whatever. If I posted something wrong with Joshi, next thing you know, I open up my inbox, I got
you're
three or
getting
more people at the
doxxed.
Joshi.
Yeah,
Girl, now you know that's wrong.
they don't.
And I'd
Let,
be like,
they
what
don't play.
part?
I think also too
You
is
know?
one. I think also too is one of those things too of just like how do I say it? Women's wrestling already gets the short end of the stick from men who cover
Mm-hmm.
things already. I never want to like feed into that. I think especially when it
No.
comes to the eras of women's wrestling specifically of just like if I get something wrong about men's wrestling sometimes cool who cares it's guess what it's a
They
million
they men.
it's a million guess
It's they
what and
men.
it's a million other men who are covering it anyway so whatever
Yeah.
I lack somebody will pick up for it but I think like when it comes to women's wrestling specifically
You
I
have
always
that pride
want
of
to
I don't want to do
exactly
that.
got to make sure that's right because the thing is a lot of times those of us who are talking about it we are often some of the only people talking about it especially the amount of women
Mm-hmm.
covering women's wrestling specifically joshi wrestling is small most of the people talking about joshi wrestling as far as like from a informational standpoint a lot of times they are men not saying that they're bad at their jobs several who are really good at
Mm-hmm.
it but as far as women telling women's stories there's very few there are very few and so it's
Very
very
few.
to me to be factual. And I think that's why that was the appeal of I think this project. You can tell that women were involved, women were hands on. They made sure that
Mm-hmm.
everything was right. They made sure that the details are right. Of course, some things are changed, due for Hollywood or whatever, but
Right.
the details, the likeness, the imagery, very much so well done. So I'm really grateful that we were able to talk about this for 3 hours and two
Yes.
minutes. Thank you, everybody,
Yes.
who listened and tuned in to this podcast. I am trying to get back in the swing of things. I had a really just awful summer. I'm not even gonna lie to you. I had a terrible summer, terrible couple months after it. And so I'm trying to like, I feel like I'm finally getting back decent, but 2025 is mine. I don't know. So
You
whenever
got
you
this.
want to go ahead and claim it. But yes, I'm really excited to just talk about things that I love talking about. That's kind of like the goal from here on out. Even though I feel like I'd already been
Yep.
doing that, but especially in the midst of
But
the
keep
year
on doing that.
I realize my work is better when I actually like what I'm talking about. Who knew?
That's true.
you
When you
know,
hate it, you gotta stop it.
and you can tell. I mean, you can, and I think that's the biggest problem. I think with a lot of wrestling media, you got people really covering stuff that they know they hate. Of just, and it shows the hate runs through, and I think that hate continues to like go through other people. And I just don't want to
Fester.
be that. I don't want to be that type of person.
No.
But you can find me at Lyric
Mm-hmm.
Wrestling on Twitter and Instagram. And I'm gonna be honest, y'all. I don't know how much longer I'll be on Twitter, but I'm on. It's I have the same handle on Blue Sky, just Blue Sky dot. I ain't gonna lie. I don't know how long I'm gonna be on there either. We just vibing. At
Yep.
this point, but my YouTube is always going to be up. You'll find this on my YouTube. That's just at Weird Swinton. And more writing is coming. I'm really excited for a lot of things that are coming out for the last 2 months, 2 month and a half of this year. Obviously, especially after that first week in January, going to have a lot of stuff about the shows coming out of Japan. Really excited about all of those shows. Really excited to talk about that. And thank you for all of you who supported what I was doing in PWI, being a part of the Women's 250 committee this year.
Mm-hmm. Look at
That is
you.
out. Thank you. I can't believe it still. I can't believe it. But that issue
I
is out.
remember when PWI had no women.
Clock it. We've come such a long way. But
I,
that issue is now
yes,
available on newsstands. The holiday issue, it has Tony Storm on the cover, so you can't miss it. And so I've been publishing PWI twice this year, so that's been pretty cool. But until the next time, thank you so much for tuning in to Maps and Graps, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
I'm retired.